Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Trullian. With me tonight is Subdeacon Daniel Kakish and Catholic Matt. How you guys doing this evening?
How you doing, Craig? Thank you again for having us, man.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much, guys, for coming on, because we're finally going to do it. We're going to solve the Great Schism,
the Oriental
Orthodox Schism. It's all getting fixed tonight, right?
That's right. Yeah, we're going to do it. That's the goal.
So the premise of this is that there is going to be a real Nicea 2025. From what I could tell, it's going to be more of a, like, I don't know, like a 1700th high school reunion more than an actual council. But the idea is, well, they're actually going to get people together, and who knows what could happen. And so I think if there were to be a church union 2025, I think we'd be disappointed where it's not going to be like this, as much as a miracle, as much as a curse, most likely, because what we'd be looking at would be ecumenism, the last gasp of the ecumenist movement before slowly it's getting replaced, because I think most of the seminarians and all the communions starting to trend more conservative across the board, even in the notorious liberal seminaries. But so I think the first order of business before we get into us hashing it out would be, let's air out our dirty laundry. Who are the liberals in our communions that are going to be going to these things and doing this? Let me talk about my own, which is, for example, we have I won't say names, but we know in the Greek Archdiocese, we had their archbishop do a gay baptism, they called it, which to me is peculiar because the children don't have any sexual proclivities that are the child being baptized. But there was a homosexual couple who had their child baptized, and the whole idea was to masquerade as this being a great advancement in social mores that were getting more modern and enlightened. And the archbishop was surprisingly censured from even the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which has liberalized on quite a few things recently, including the issue of divorced clergy, which makes zero sense for the Roman Catholics. But I think something in Daniel Kakish, I presume you guys haven't gone that liberal in any of your jurisdictions. I mean, that's crazy. The whole idea would be that once you're ordained to deacon and up, that means you can't get married anymore. There's this whole thing, like there's no such thing as remarriage, let alone in the Latin rite where you can't be married, period. So there's major liberalism socially. I would say in many respects, it's more advanced in the liberal Eastern Orthodox jurisdictions than would be in others. I think when it comes to other sexual mores in Eastern Orthodoxy, it's kind of overplayed how much more liberal they are than let's say Roman Catholics. I think Roman Catholics, using things other than economia, other categories of thought, that is, have caved on birth control, not on the official level, but we could debate that, and things to that nature. I'm going to presume that has not occurred in Oriental Orthodoxy. So the reason I'm saying this is we have an issue with liberals. We have a lot of ecumenists that would say, oh, we believe the same thing as Roman Catholics, really. We believe the same thing as Oriental Orthodox. And so they would be down the Nicea 2025. So we actually have bishops that could make it happen for the right or wrong reasons, depending on the side that you're on. So that, very briefly, is my dirty laundry. How about we get into your dirty laundry, Matt?
Yeah, well, you don't have to look very far to find it. That's sad to say. I'm just going to be honest with everyone. I mean, it's I mean, Google exists, Twitter exists. You can just the stories are unfortunately many and varied out there, and of course the worst of it comes from Germany, which, as maybe liberal leaning as Pope Francis is, even his Vatican has had to smack down Germany more than once in the past few years, and I think that's coming again soon. I know this whole synodal. I mean, like, you're even seeing rumblings of it now, and it's an interesting actually dynamic as to how you look at it. You can look at it in a couple different ways. A lot of ways that I've seen them looking at it is that Pope Francis is kind of annoyed with German bishops for going too far too soon. That maybe he is, some would say, on their side, but the Germans are making it too obvious, and he wants to be more subtle. and so that's maybe, even if that is his gripe with them, it still ended up, the result was still the same, where Germany was put down by that's not called the CDF anymore, but whatever the CDF is now, Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, or Propagation of the Faith. So even then, even now, you can still see that, you know, that the Vatican has put the brakes on some of the worst of it. But it's there, and unfortunately, the only way it's going to go away, like, completely, was, well, for one thing, that'd be a miracle. But two, it's going to take a new pope and a new administration, basically a new. There's going to need to be a new sheriff in town before things can really get cleaned up.
And so, like, I've heard things like with the French, the Germans, like, are they really moving forward with, let's just go right to the point, gay marriage, but not calling it gay marriage?
The Germans really
priests,
want to. The Germans really, really want to. They are pushing the envelope, and that's why I said, I mean, like, even if Pope Francis would ostensibly be on their side, maybe not as much, but like ostensibly he kind of likes to push the envelope. The Germans are pushing the envelope way too fast, way too soon, for his liking. And so that's basically why that last year they were smacked down when the Vatican explicitly condemned the idea of blessing homosexual unions. And that's, I mean, and like, even in Germany itself, I think they required like 66% of bishops to sign on with a lot of the stuff, and they couldn't even get that. They got the majority, which is not a good thing, of course. But there were even enough bishops in Germany that said no to a lot of the radical stuff. I missed you there, Craig. What was that?
Oh no, I'm yelling at my wife in the other room. So that being said, it's, how about the liberals that you have in your community when it comes to, like, for a Nicea 2025 situation, whether or not they care about Nestorianism, Miaphysitism?
It's sad to say that isn't even on the radar. That isn't even on the radar of the leftist Roman Catholic. I honestly doubt they even know what that is. And it's also probably true that a lot of the liberal, I mean, they've got a ton of heresies of their own. Sad to say is that what we're dealing with, most likely, and you even find Roman Catholic bishops that'll say this. You're seeing a lot of, and I think it's a good thing, actually, because it's bringing the truth out. A lot of the faithful bishops are starting to more boldly attack the unfaithful bishops, and you're starting to see these conflicts come out into the open, which, again, I think can only be a good thing. And you'll even see, basically, for all intents and purposes, these, liberal modernist bishops, they don't have faith at all. And, like, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. And even if they do have faith, it's going to be a really bastardized heretical version, Arianist, Nestorian, all sorts of things, all sorts of problems that they have, even if they have any kind of faith, as it were.
So you would settle for the young pope if he was real?
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely.
Even season 2, young pope?
I have not seen season 2, and I don't care.
I don't know. It looks really bad, so I'm not even going to look into it. But all right, so Subdeacon Daniel, how about your dirty laundry, the Oriental Orthodox, or do they have it all right?
No, we don't have it all right. I don't know if it's the same approach, though, because it seems like the Roman Catholic Eastern Orthodox are more settled in the West so far, so they're actually dealing with this stuff. And as far as I know, there hasn't been similar levels of liberalness yet that we've had to kind of face so far, because we're still new in the West, but we have other things, like, for example, you mentioned that at the deacon level, you can't get married after. Yes, the Syriacs and the Copts, we agree with you. The Armenians and the Tewahedos, their deacons can be married after their deacons. Yeah, I tell them, like, what's going on, guys. And then there's stuff like this. I mean, we're all going to 2025. Like you said, it's going to be like a high school reunion. what does it say? Advancing the perspective of Russian. Oh, okay. We'll talk about the Assyrian Church of the East soon, but it's gonna be like a high school reunion. What I think is I don't want to like cut to the chase or whatever, but just because I'm thinking about possible liberalisms, is maybe things that are ecumenist, lack thereof, stuff like that. But regarding like homosexuality, or even like living with someone outside of marriage, these things, so far in seeing the behavior of the Oriental Orthodox churches in the West, they've been very quick to excommunicate those people. Like very, very quick, very quiet, very like, let's not make this a bigger thing, or make it controversial.
Well, that makes them smart because it's bad for business. It spits in your face to your paying customers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, when people say, "Oh, the church is corrupt," it's just about the money. No. If you'd anything way different, if it was just about the money, they're losing money outside their eyeballs or ears because of the really the bad decisions they're making, spitting in their face to their best paying customers. And so that being said, I've heard from liberal Eastern Orthodox priests that even homosexuality could become a tolerated form of economia. And what this is predicated upon is the toleration of heterosexual fornication, of heterosexual sins. Because we've got to the point where people just commune, they don't go to confession, they don't have to repent, no one serves penance. So let's just be honest, in the 21st century, that means pretty much almost everyone is living in flagrant, I'm forgetting my good categories of thought, mortal sins, flagrant, unrepentant mortal sins, and they're being communes. And so homosexuality is just yet another. It's not really exceptional. So, like, do you find then, instead of it being officially accepted, Subdeacon Daniel, that it's just these things are going to be accepted because they're just not stopping anyone? Or do you think they guard the chalice much more consistently, even amongst the most liberal of Oriental Orthodox?
I think that so think about it. There's 5 churches in Oriental Orthodoxy: Coptic, Syriac, Armenian, Ethiopian, Eritrean. Within those 5 churches are 4 rites. But if you look on a map, you'll see they are very east. Like to them, the Eastern Orthodox are Western. Mm-hmm. So it's so foreign to the wiring of these people on the lay level through the hierarchy. It's just so foreign that it's not a possible way to function and experience the church life in Oriental.
Yeah, on a culturally, personal level too. Yeah.
It's
a blessing. I'll say that's it. In one sense, that's a very big blessing for you. Yeah.
It's. I think it also has to do culturally with the communal focus of the culture. So instead of the individual focus. So even if somebody were to do that stuff privately, he'd leave the community. It wouldn't be something that he can do in the community. So it's like yes, they are. It's not like even on the church level, it would be unthinkable for this to be a normalized thing. But it's like the gate in front of the gate, if you will, is the culture too.
Yeah,
it's so far away from the minds of these people.
I like what you said there. It's like even if it got into the head of someone that they wanted to live a life of wanton sexual debauchery, they would just leave. They just wouldn't be in the church. They wouldn't want to be in the church anymore.
They'd excommunicate
why would you want to?
Yeah,
it's like
I wish that were the case with Rome.
As married men, when it comes to gay marriage, we were trying to protect you homosexuals from the problems of marriage. Now you have the problems that we have. So it's one of those things where it's like, why would you even care to insert yourself into this? Because it's way easier just not to go to church on Sunday morning. It's just way easier to live however you want without trying to twist rules or come up with epistemologies where the rules don't matter and the traditions don't matter. Just in the end of the day, I think what's inescapable, if people want the answer to the question, is that intolerance exists on both sides. The question is, what flavor intolerance you're going to want. And so the people that want to impose their intolerance upon you are going to always try to figure out the means and mechanism to do so. So I just think that's the consistent thread in all of it.
It's always been, in my experience, that the leftists are the most intolerant people on the face of the earth.
And Stalin wasn't that intolerant. So anyway,
he
no,
let everything go, right? Yeah.
On the issue of ecumenism and liberalism, so it comes out in this conversation, we could say, all right, one notch above for Oriental Orthodox, they're least of a mess. But would you say, Subdeacon Daniel, that when it comes to intercommunion, that Oriental Orthodox are by far the messiest? Meaning they'll commune Eastern Orthodox, they'll commune Roman Catholics, they'll commune Anglicans, they'll commune Protestants or even Episcopal, that chalice isn't really guarded whatsoever. That exists among liberal circles. How widespread is that?
No, I would say that the only intercommunion agreement that existed is the one that was between the Syriacs and the Antiochians. And from information that I received, that is no longer in place. It's no longer in practice.
And so how about in your city, you said that the Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox priest would commune at each other's altars. Does that still happen, or that changed even the last few years?
It's changed recently. I don't know what happened, but something happened, and then that stuff all ended overnight.
Maybe so knows so in money. So, all right. So Oriental Orthodox is going the right direction. Matt, looks like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I did have a question. I could be incorrect about this, but I believe I remember I think it was, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, where I think it was the Oriental Orthodox Patriarch and Pope Francis did sign a joint agreement recognizing each other's baptism.
That's correct.
That's correct, and that's still the case. That hasn't been
absolutely
or anything. Yeah, that's as far as I knew about the whole thing. If it was that, Oriental Orthodox commune Roman Catholics, that would have been news to me.
If I can expand a little bit, Craig, on that intercommunion agreement with the Antiochians that we did a show about, if you remember, me, you.
Because the reason I'm referring to is I remember you telling me that even Protestants sometimes would go to a local parish, forget which one you're going to, and they could be communed because simply they were Arab.
Oh, no. If that was happening, that was an abuse. But I'm saying, like, actually, officially speaking, there was that intercommunion agreement with the Antiochians because of intermarriage. So it was a pastoral agreement for the sake of intermarrying families. The idea when they made the agreement 30 years ago was that we got to get them marrying each other instead of marrying Muslims, right? So now it's been 30 years, and it seems like it's fallen out of favor from the hierarchy to the clergy, just like a small level Henoticon kind of thing, and it just kind of lost to history now.
Yeah, in Eastern Orthodoxy, the Bishop of Chicago in the Greek Archdiocese was communing the heterodox spouses. So meaning people not even charismated in the church are being, at least on paper, supposed to be communed. Whether or not priests went ahead and listened to it, I'm sure almost all of them didn't. But these are some of the really far out liberal problems that exist within Orthodoxy. And people are going to, even though, let's say, some other jurisdictions like the OCA, Serbia, and the United States, some of them are notoriously liberal in certain quarters. But all the really far out stuff appears to be among the Greeks specifically. And that brings us into Nicea 2025, which is if there is a union between at least the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox, it appears it's going to be the Greco-sphere that is most likely to go into communion with the Roman Catholics. They're the ones that have been doing Vesper services with the Roman Catholics, where in Ukraine, the Roman Catholic priest is walking through the royal doors and all the overt things which are starting to trend towards union. And so I think because people want to hear us actually try to hammer out how we can make this union other than us looking the other way, how about I give each of you guys a chance to say maybe what you think we have the most in common, which would be the easiest to bridge. So Matt, being it's been a little bit since you talked, how about you tell us what do you think is the easiest thing in your opinion, doesn't mean I'm going to hold you to it, that would for maybe Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox to bridge, or maybe just one of them?
In terms of like something that is currently separating us, that would be easiest to bridge, or something basically that
so like Purgatory, is it easiest to get on board with Purgatory? Is it easiest to get on board with the Papacy or whatever?
I had thought about like on a sliding scale. Basically, I was just kind of trying to think of different ones, and maybe we could talk about them. And actually, I got to confess my ignorance as to a lot. I was looking into a lot of what kind of how the Byzantine, views in terms of Eastern Orthodoxy. I got to confess a lot of ignorance in terms of how Oriental Orthodox view things like purgatory, and some of this stuff, things like the beatific vision or seeing God's essence or the filioque. For all I know, I know very little of how Oriental Orthodox view those issues. And so I'd be interested to learn a lot from you, Daniel, on that. In terms of, I will say, just because you mentioned it, I see purgatory. You can criticize, I guess, us in one way, in that a lot of the medieval kind of views of purgatory, of being literal fire and strict kind of this literal days of periods, and a lot of kind of specific time periods spent in purgatory, there's definitely been moved away from. And you can criticize us for maybe being inconsistent, but the simple fact is that it's not really the way purgatory is looked at anymore. Of course you can read Pope Benedict XVI's Spe Salvi. It talks a lot about how kind of relooking at purgatory. Definitely we still believe it, and the essence of it is that they are holy souls that will be going to heaven. There won't be any falling away from them, slipping back and being lost forever. They are experiencing pain of sorts, and a deep spiritual pain of sorts, because it's mostly in the longing for heaven that they have to wait, and they can be helped by our prayers, and specifically by the liturgy. So that those, I think, three strong, definite principles are maintained, and I don't really see how much the Eastern Orthodox or the Oriental Orthodox would have to gripe about that. I think that's those three things can be, I think we can all assent to those, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
I would say yes.
And I would concur that with St. Mark of Ephesus, that purgatory is really the lowest hanging fruit, which we have in common. And I'm actually very pleased to see that with all the distinctives, the Roman Catholic Church is becoming very, very, very close to really what the Eastern Orthodox conception is. I think it's almost becoming a nominal meaning, like you have a word for it and why we don't. Just use our word sort of deal. Right. I know that Cardinal Ratzinger, before he was Pope, he essentially described purgatory exactly in the terms that you would hear Eastern Orthodox talk about, like the dead in Hades, which I think is Decree 13 or Decree 16 in the Council of Jerusalem 1672. I'm sorry, I don't have it memorized, but it's like we have a decree on this. And essentially, if the Roman Catholics clarify or reevaluate or change or whatever word you want to use, if they describe the doctrine using what we confess in our own councils, then that kind of eliminates the difference. I think perhaps the pushback a little bit would just be there'd have to be an affirmation of toll houses. But even then, especially recently in Orthodox history, we've just been clarifying toll houses, particularly mean that you meet bishops after you die. Angels after you die. And so if you get met by angels after you die and one defends you, one accuses you, I don't think that's a concept unless you're just this is just not part of our tradition. We refuse to accept it. That's really all that bizarre or something that require pushing back against.
Yeah, as far as I know with the toll houses thing, I know that can, I kind of view that as maybe a kind of maybe some of the medieval kind of over the top things that happened during purgatory. It happened with purgatory in the medieval period, those kind of speculations. I mean, if you want to break it down, I think the original of what, I think St. Athanasius' Life of Anthony, of saying, hey, the devil's his soul's rising up to heaven and the devil is trying to prevent that, so he's dragging you back down or something like that. Sure. That seems fine. That if you want to say that there's an angelic presence in that the angelic spirits are involved, both the holy and the reprobate angels are involved in the afterlife process of getting a soul to heaven. That would be no problem, I think, with Roman Catholics at all. Subdeacon, with the guardian angels, that we know that they're there and interceding on behalf of their charge.
Now, and if they're interceding, it would seem that there'd have to be a bad one there, have to stand in between. Yeah. And just so people are aware, the Latin tradition does include these things as well. Just it seems to have fallen out in emphasis later in the Middle Ages. So Subdeacon Daniel Kakish, you've heard us kind of go back and forth in Purgatory. You nod your head a bit to what Catholic Matt was talking about. With if you want to add also the aspect of toll houses, is this something we can hammer out? Do you think the Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox are identical on this? Can we get your comments?
Yeah, I did a show with a couple of Catholics recently about it. I told them I don't know if this agrees with Purgatory. I don't know if this agrees with toll houses. I'm just going to tell you what I believe, and you tell me if it agrees with you. And I read them quotes from Saint Ephrem. I read them quotes from the Syriac Orthodox prayers for the departed. And whoever I tell this stuff to, whether they're Eastern Orthodox or Roman Catholic, they tell me, yeah, that agrees with us. So it seems like it's a in between of both, because we believe in purification after death. Saint Ephrem talks about those who pay recompense in Gehenna for forgivable sins after they die, and also we believe there's a prayer the priest says when he's putting the holy oil onto the departed person, and he says, "May by this oil your soul be slippery to the spirits in the air." So it's like a reference to toll houses in a way. So it's I think we have a very strong tradition in this, but we just haven't defined it to have a name, you know. Craig, do you want me to comment on the
two bishops?
Yeah.
All right, news. Dun, 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 dun. All right, we got a breaking news.
It's actually stronger. It's stronger than what the fellow is saying here.
Okay.
So the synod, the Coptic Orthodox Synod, had on multiple occasions ended dialogue with the Anglicans because of the views on homosexuality, having homosexual clergy, homosexual marriages, women priests, whatever. All of those things have ended the dialogue on an official level 20 years ago. So now there is illicit conversations ongoing between particular individuals in the Coptic Orthodox Church and the Anglicans. So then these two Coptic Orthodox bishops have appealed against those who are doing that to the Holy Synod and the Pope of Alexandria.
All right. And so let's talk indulgences, because now we got to start, sadly, really pushing Matt to the very wall of what he could get us to agree to. And it's because this is necessarily tied to the Roman Catholic doctrine of purgatory. It seems like we have come to the point where there's agreement as to a state after death for those that aren't glorified in heaven. There seems to be agreement that, yes, there's a hell, and then so there's people that are in really neither permanently damned nor permanently saved either. They're in the state between that. Roman Catholics historically called it purgatory. But they have added to this doctrine of purgatory this way in which the papacy specifically, and those in communion with him, though only the Pope himself could give a plenary indulgence, but other bishops in the Roman Catholic communion could give these lesser partial indulgences. That this time, if you had one has correct intent, I don't know the words you want to use, but we're going to let you say that, Catholic Matt. If one has the right intent and is faithful, that by the mercy of the bishop could loosen all those sins, so that theoretically speaking, you would spend no time in purgatory, needing the prayers of saints after death, the prayers of those on earth after death, and that you would be immediately in heaven, presuming you have the correct intent and everything at the purgatory. And there's just no analog for this whatsoever in Eastern Orthodoxy. And as far as I'm aware, Subdeacon Dan Kakish could correct me, in Oriental Orthodoxy. And it seems to put a peculiar emphasis on the bishop to be able to loosen a penance, which is necessary for someone to correct behavior, because without holiness, no one to see the Lord. It almost makes it where it becomes transactional. It's not that the penance is I don't know the right word, like a medication. It's a cure to an issue so that someone could be sanctified. It almost becomes arbitrary, where you could just become sanctified like a light switch. So do you want to clarify, because I'm just giving as an outsider the right way for us to see this? maybe make your best case why we should accept this, how we could reconcile this. Catholic Matt,
Yeah, I can see how you could view it as like the kind of light switch on and off thing. I want to put it like when he said the plenary indulgence that removes all temporal punishment due to sins. I want to say that those are not like the fact that that this is announced may not be so exceedingly rare. Although it's not it's not like you could just do anything and get a plenary indulgence. But the fact that your state of your soul, you have to have no attachment to sins at all on your soul, which is, needless to say, extremely difficult. So like to actually get a plenary indulgence, I would say is extremely rare, practically speaking.
So they could give them out like candy, but you're not going to be able to swallow that candy.
Well, yeah, I mean, like they could be announced like candy in a sense. That's not like the most common thing that's done, but yeah, I mean, like the Pope, if he wants, he could basically declare something to be a plenary indulgence, and that's just of his own purview, with his authority. And it's usually like something like it's still a decent holy act that you have to do. It's not, like I said, it's not nothing. But in order to actually gain the plenary aspect where everything is all the temporal punishments, and be specific here, we're talking about temporal punishments due to sin, not eternal punishments. There's only temporal punishments due to sin. In order to have them all wiped off, you have to have no attachment in your soul to sin of any kind, which is, like I said, extremely difficult. So most of the time, the vast majority of the time, an indulgence is going to be partial. It's going to relieve part of the temporal punishment and due to sin, not all of it.
Now, that's a stupid question. If you had zero attachment to sin, wouldn't you just go to heaven by default anyway?
Even if you have no attachment, you've still done things in the past that still need to, like you said, the penance. There's something that still needs to be done, even if your soul currently doesn't have that kind of attachment. But so again, it's a matter of justice. And in terms of like how this developed, you can even see back in the ancient church, like there were stiff penances were imposed, but the bishop could and did have the authority to mitigate those if he wanted to. And often I kind of describe it as, if you're in prison, some people got released for good behavior or got time off for good behavior. And you could see that, maybe if a 10-year penance was imposed on someone, but they kept it and did very, very well for, the first 3 years, the bishop it was in his purview to say, okay, like you've done really, really well. We'll let you off the hook now, as it were. So that was, it's an act of mercy in a sense. It's basically an indulgence really at the end of the day is an act of mercy. And I don't see it as like such a huge issue with the church being merciful if she so desires. Now, of course, like you say, it's not required. Maybe if you want to have the attitude like, no, you gotta, you have to finish the course no matter what. I don't care how well you've been doing it, or I don't care how well you've started. I guess, you can have that attitude. You can be more rigorous like that if you want. But like an indulgence is simply, hey, if you're doing this holy thing, then that leads to a spiritual benefit, and now the church is going to have mercy. And because the church has the authority to bind and loose in heaven, again, every bishop kind of has this general authority to bind and loose, the kind of disciplinary, authority. They can use it and be merciful if they want to. So really, at the end of the day, that's what an indulgence is. Is that so bad?
Well, is that so bad, Subdeacon Daniel?
I don't know anything about indulgences, but from everything Matt's been saying, I don't know. We pray for the departed every prayer, every hour of prayer, and the liturgy, and we offer the Eucharist on behalf of them and behalf of us. So I don't know much about indulgences. I think it's attached to the papacy, if I'm correct. I think it is.
It is, but each bishop also, like, they have the right to reduce canonical penalties and things like that.
I see.
And I actually don't know, and maybe my wife would know. She actually works for the diocese. I don't know. I'll have to find out if each individual bishop can actually make an indulgence themselves, or if it has to come directly from the Pope.
Interesting.
That actually I don't know the answer to. I'll have to look up.
I just want to comment on God, King, and Nations, that statement he had earlier about the Serbians. So my parish actually before we got our own parish, we were weekly using the local Serbian parish every week for our liturgy for years.
So there you go. I would say the issue again with indulgences is that the real issue is the reason penances existed, by the way, is because they're beneficial to our salvation. It's because the Eucharist doesn't benefit us if we're not being faithful, if we're guilty of some sort of sin, if we've not prepared for it properly. And so being that that's the case, it makes sense that bishops had penances, and it also makes sense that in the earliest church, there were indulgences, but they had nothing to do with even the prayers of the saints. Had to do with prayers of the requests of actual martyrs or confessors. They wrote it while they were still alive or out of jail, and on your behalf saying, vouching for you like a letter of recommendation. They're actually called letters of commendation. This guy, he had all these weird circumstances. I vouch for this guy and take it to my authority because I'm suffering right now or I'm about to die for the faith. And so it makes sense that the bishop could be like, all right, I could show mercy to this individual for the penance because based on this authority, it makes sense that this person could commune worthily and the Eucharist will be beneficial to that person's salvation. This whole dynamic is missing from the later Roman Catholic practice of indulgences. In fact, has nothing to do with it whatsoever. The issue of Roman Catholic indulgences are much more similar to almsgiving, right? Meaning like you give alms or you do some sort of meritorious good work. And that's, of course, beneficial towards your salvation. But then it becomes, well, then a bishop can decide, in theory, how beneficial that could be, and on behalf of other people. So in the earliest church, yes, we could commemorate the dead with the Eucharist. Yes, we could give alms or do good works for the sake of other people, but there was no precise way of knowing how much that's going to help that person, at least on paper. While theoretically speaking, presuming correct intent, you say like that, the right intent going in and all that, theoretically speaking, that indulgence could categorically take care of everything for someone else or for yourself. And that's something where only, to quote St. Cyprian, only God alone could have mercy. How could any bishop possibly know that sort of thing? So I think it would be the historical aspect of it just not existing being problematic for the Eastern Orthodox, and I presume for the Oriental Orthodox. And the second thing would be that you could kind of see where Protestantism comes out of this, right? Because it is transactional, even if, yes, you need a tent and all these things, but ultimately it's transactional. You can have other people's righteousness credited to your account, and the bishop is this mediator for it. And the Protestants
you think Protestants would love that. Other people's righteousness credited to your account.
So but you can see that it's all in the same ballpark, even if you're playing for different teams. While I think that's a baseball ballpark, and I think the Oriental Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox are on the football gridiron. They're playing a different sport when it comes to that issue.
Cricket.
But all right, this is Nicea 2025, so we got to make hard compromises. Will this work? Could we let you say what you're saying, but categorize it to the point that we admit, though the Pope could absolutely flagrantly guarantee that it's the case, that in fact, that's a material error and it's just wrong. And material errors could be made without that being an infallibility issue. So the judgment of the Pope or whatever Roman Catholic bishop, because also other Roman Catholic bishops could give partial indulgences up to 325 days. That's just a material error that they think they can make it plenary or partial. All they're doing is making the discernment that based upon what you did, it's beneficial for someone's salvation somehow. Is that acceptable, Matt?
Well, partial, I mean, again, I don't even know what that means, 325 days. I don't even know where you're getting that figure from. And that may be my own.
I'm pretty sure it might actually be from the Catechism, but if not, it's from Catholic Encyclopedia.
Okay, well, that's my own ignorance then. But I like partial literally means just something. That something could be a little, could be a lot, could be whatever. It literally just means something. We have no, I won't say that I know how much. Plenary is total, but again, that's extremely difficult.
Sure.
So
Absolutely. Not even
yeah,
close.
whatever. Not with my son. My son has the best hair actually of all.
All right, continue. I'm sorry.
Because he has his mom's curls, but my blonde locks, and it's just like all the girls go crazy over it.
Oh, look at that.
But yeah, I mean, like I don't think I don't see why you have to insist that this is like a bad thing for our communion to do. Y'all don't have to do it. I wouldn't say I would insist on Eastern Orthodox or Oriental Orthodox adopting a similar practice. Y'all do what you want in terms of how you want to reduce canonical penalties and according to your own discipline and your own canon law. Go nuts, y'all do what you want. This is if you this wants to remain as our thing, the way we kind of look at it, even if you think it's maybe
so let me interject then.
Or too specific.
So if we could categorize partial and plenary as disciplinary, and we agree that anything that's disciplinary could be fallible, it could be altered, it could be asserted but not known infallibly, then could we say the whole indulgence theology could be reduced to, theoretically, doesn't mean it is, but could be reduced to that anything plenary, partial, that sort of disciplinary categorization could be in error, and so therefore we could put it aside, and otherwise to say all that indulgences are is the bishop recognizing that whatever meritorious good work is beneficial for yourself or someone else's salvation. Could we take that minimalistic of approach? Or is that unacceptable?
I think we could take that minimalistic approach. I don't know if we could. I don't know if you need to insist on using the word error here. But I think in terms of what you said, other than that, like this is just a disciplinary way of saying that doing these holy things is beneficial to your soul, to whatever amount. Sure. I think we could, if we want to leave it at that. I think we could leave it at that.
Our Subdeacon Daniel Kakish, would you accept this compromise?
I think that you guys are being way too nice, both of you, and I don't think that you are in touch. I don't think you're in touch. You're being too respectful of the current situation of church politics. I don't think reality is what you guys think. And I'm telling you,
reality is this show. Like the Pope is watching it, the Ecumenical Patriarch's watching it, the Pope of Egypt is watching it, and it's going to do something.
I'm telling you guys this from.
We're going to teach them.
I know people. I'm telling you guys this because I know people close to the situation. Rome they're not talking about indulgences. They're like, whatever you guys want to do. Just accept the papacy. One nature, two nature.
We'll get to the papacy, but okay. So for the sake of this conversation and for all the theology nerds out there, is the compromise just struck good enough for you, Subdeacon Daniel Kakish?
No.
Okay, why
not? Because I don't. Well, what you're saying by compromise, you mean that the Latins keep it for themselves and we have nothing to do with it? The compromise that was just struck would be that any differentiation between plenary and partial is a discipline, and so thereby, even if they continue it, they recognize that it may actually not be correct as disciplines are changeable and not infallible. And so thereby, from our communions, we could recognize their indulgences merely as an expression that the bishop could recognize that a good work done on your own behalf or someone else's is beneficial for that person's salvation. And it's limited to their jurisdiction.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and they can't spread their words. Okay.
Right, we can, yeah. And
guys, we've done it. We've solved indulgences. Let's go to the next. Let's go to the next one. Original sin. Subdeacon Daniel, tell us what your doctrine original sin is, and let's see and convince us so we can get on board.
So I know that right now in the Syriac Orthodox Church, the bishops are currently discussing this topic because some people hold to the original sin like idea, and some people are holding to whatever the other one is. I don't know too much about it. I just know some are focusing on what we gain in baptism versus those who focus on what we lose in baptism. And I think that from what I've read in the Syriac tradition, the focus is on what we gain. So there doesn't seem to be a clear concept of original sin in the Latin way of speaking about it. In the early Syriac fathers, it's more so we were created in glory. God created Adam and Eve in a robe of glory. Figuratively speaking, when they sinned, it was stripped of them. And this comes from rabbinic targums that St. Ephraim and the early Syriacs build upon. So then Jesus comes, gets baptized, leaves the robe of glory back in the water for us, so that when we're baptized, whoever is baptized into Christ puts on Christ, St. Paul says. So we put the robe of glory back on. He restores us to the original situation we were created in paradise. And now we can eat from the fruit of the tree of life, which is the Eucharist. So this is our understanding. I know it maybe seems super primitive or basic, but you're asking a Syriac Orthodox. If you got a Copt, maybe you'd get like more of a philosophical answer. This is what we have to offer, you know.
Well, okay, so Matt, how about you tell us what you think we ought to agree? Because it seems like what was said there is like, yep, baptism helps you grow in sanctification. Without it, you don't have that, so you can't be saved. And that, I don't think anyone would reject this. So how about you communicate to us your precise view of original sin as best as you can?
Sure. Basically, what the Subdeacon Daniel said was absolutely like that. You know, we were created in glory, and the Latin terminology is we were created in a state of grace. We were created with this supernatural enlivening of the soul to make it alive to God. And when Adam sinned, that supernatural enlivening was lost to where we became dead in our sin. Our soul became dead in sin, as St. Paul says in Ephesians. And what that means, that soul, that state of death, or the lack of grace, that is what original sin is. And the way I describe it as an analogy, imagine that, you know, if your parents have an immense fortune and they blow it all, they lose that entire fortune, they can no longer pass that fortune on to you. Even though you didn't do anything, so there have been past, formulations of original sin called inherited guilt. That is not really the teaching of the Latins here, although it was the opinion of some. That is not the official teaching of Roman Catholicism.
And just because people will press back against that, what could he do to assure us to say this is not the official teaching? And what is the official teaching?
I mean, look at the catechism. I don't have the catechism on me. I wish I did. I should have had it. I should have came more prepared.
We'll take your word for what it says.
It's basically it's just that, we need this fortune back in order to get to heaven. And so even though you could say that the soul didn't it's not being punished necessarily for something someone else did, something Adam did. The simple fact is, you need grace. The human soul comes into a condition needing grace in order to be saved. We don't come into existence with that enlivening effect in our soul. We come into existence dead, with the only exception us Latins obviously hold for the Virgin Mary. Jesus being God, it's like it's not even really a question for him. But the only creature we have, the only human creature we accept this original sin from, is the Blessed Virgin Mary, and that's still being a gift of grace for her, that we call the Immaculate Conception. But with everyone else, the human race is just in a condition where we need grace in order to go to heaven, and we don't start with it. Baptism is how we start it, is how we get it back. And
we would say, like, the church, just like how your mother births you come out all wet, Same thing, the church births you through the baptism. Baptism is the womb of the church.
I.e. born from above, as our Lord said in John 3:5.
Yeah.
Now, you said you need grace to go to heaven. So Adam and Eve, then, were they already in heaven because they didn't have this flawed state, or what was their state?
Their state was what we call original justice. where they have obviously preternatural gifts, like they couldn't suffer, they couldn't die. Those gifts were also lost, and unfortunately, baptism does not restore those. Wish it did. But
is there any reason? Is there a specific reason why it doesn't?
That's a good question. I mean, it's just that wasn't the plan, I guess. That's a good question, and that's really it's speculative at that point. But it does do something more important. That's restoring the life of God in the soul, and that's the most important thing that we need to get back.
So for Ephraim, Craig, and the Syriacs, we would say that paradise, if you want to call it that, yeah, it was because it's the heaven on earth. It was on the plateau of a holy mountain in Mesopotamia. So this is where paradise was. So then when Adam and Eve were kicked out, they went down like generationally over like their kids, and it would always go down a level on the mountain until they're completely off the mountain. Then God just took the mountain. So we believe that it's heaven. We call it paradise, or the garden, we call it. But we believe it was here at the same time.
Now, let me ask both you guys to answer this question, and then I'll clarify the Eastern Orthodox view. Why do we have sinful thoughts, sinful proclivities, the passions, concupiscence, and why do we die? So, Subdeacon, you first, and then Matt.
Because this glory was stripped from us, so now we've been corrupted, I think is the word. So then this is the results of the fruit, the what we've sowed is death because we sinned.
All right, yeah, and Matt.
It's not long. And that's the concupiscence is the Latin term that we have for it. That's this internal bent towards sin, even though it's not a sin itself. It's not a sin we commit. It's a wound in our nature. It's a wound in human nature that comes from the fall, and that does concupiscence cause death, or is it two different sicknesses? It's like having the flu and COVID. That's a good question. That's a good question. I'll have to double check on that. I want to say it's like, I don't know if that concupiscence causes that. Maybe it does. I'll just say I'm not sure, and I'll have to look it up. Now I do know that, but I definitely could say that that's another result of the fall. Is that now human beings, we're passible now. We used to be impassible, where we could not suffer, we could not die, and that was one of the preternatural gifts, and that was lost through the fall of Adam, and now we are passible. We can suffer and die.
Now, I'll be very brief, and if you guys want clarification, you could press me on it. But essentially, original sin does exist in Eastern Orthodoxy. When the whole debate that we don't believe in original sin, I think similar to Oriental Orthodox, is we don't believe in inherited guilt. There are those who make the argument that even St. Augustine himself used different Latin words, which would have connoted that even he didn't believe in inherited guilt. I'm sympathetic to some arguments and not others, because St. Augustine was certainly a transducinianist, and he connected that to his doctrine of original sin. But that issue aside, it's the original state of mankind was natural goodness. I think it's the best word. But Adam and Eve were made in the image of God. They were by nature good. They were not bad. And so they're by nature good. They're by nature human. They weren't divinized, but human nature as a default is completely receptive to the grace of God. Human nature by default is completely receptive to cooperating with the grace of God, of willing God's will, of doing God's doing, co-energizing or cooperation, okay? And so that was the default from Adam and Eve. And being that's a default, they were tentatively, some pronounce the word for me. Immortal, right? So they were immortal, because obviously they sinned and they died, right? But if they would have not sinned, they could have not died, because death doesn't exist in that state. And in fact, if they attain to theosis, so they attain to the point where that with full knowledge, they always willed God's will and always did God's doings, they would never die. It would be an impossibility. In fact, they'd be glorified at that point. And so, that's what we're going to be in heaven, God willing. We are resurrected, and we no longer have the passions. But more than this, we're going to have full knowledge of God, which enables us to do this. So that being said, original sin is what takes that state of way, that neutral state of natural goodness, which makes you tentatively immortal. And so how does that work? Well, the moment Eve and then Adam even considered sin, which means they considered a will that wasn't only God's will, that distorts their will. And the reason why that's important is because co-willing with God allows us to co-operate or co-energize with God. And that's what actually keeps you alive. When you don't co-energize with God, if you're not sustained by the grace, because grace is another thing, just having God's energies, by the grace of God, you wilt and you die, you corrupt. And so the cause of corruption is by necessity the actual, the cause of the passions, right? If you have passions or you have concupiscence, then you also corrupt and die. And so that's a necessary connection. So what we inherit from Adam and Eve is the passions, and the proclivity to have passions. And that's what causes the death. So we die according to our own sin, like Ezekiel chapter 18 says, not because of someone else's sin, but we do inherit their sinfulness. That's why we die. And so that being the case, that at its very core is the Orthodox doctrine of original sin. And so is this something that, Subdeacon Danny, is this something you would accept, even if it's more developed, or do you think it's too developed compared to the theology that you're aware of?
I would say that's absolutely, like, I would say it fits perfectly with what we believe. I think that's a very cool way to put it, so you don't sound like a Sunday school teacher like I did. Like, it's awesome.
There you go. And how about you, Matt?
I'm actually, Dalen, can I ask, like, what did you think specifically of what I kind of formulated earlier?
I think all right. So my opinion of what you formulated, like this idea of original justice, it doesn't make clear why Adam and Eve corrupt, why they have the passions or concupiscence. It's not very clear why I think the Orthodox doctrine actually makes very clear how it works, right? And so the default state of human nature is that human nature always co-wills and cooperates the grace of God. It's when the way human nature operates, not in its original state, but in a fallen state, the fallen tropos is the word in Greek, that's when you have the effects of what we call original sin. So really, original sin is just this deficient tropos. It's not the original tropos of Adam and Eve. And so in a sense, you call original, if you would define original justice as original tropos, that would actually make a lot of sense.
Okay, that's probably okay. Daniel, what did you think of my formulation earlier?
Yeah, I don't. I didn't hear anything because you matched it up to mine, right? So I didn't just instead of saying glory, you said grace, and like I didn't see anything that was that would be objectable. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, Craig, in responding to you, I think you may have seen this coming, where we're going to run into maybe a bit of a rut. Is when we talk about, the Immaculate Conception dogma.
Well, that's going to be the very next topic.
Later,
because that's the very next topic. So how about where we are right now, and then we're gonna talk about Mariology.
Well, okay. Well, because those are linked in here. How you view original sin is going to very much view.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
Which is why, I mean, and maybe you could at least understand, like, from my, I guess, Latin formulation, why we believe it. And I can kind of understand from, if that's going to be your Eastern Orthodox formulation, why you really don't. Because, Mary did have the passions, and she, the blameless passions, I'm not going to assign to her, like the sinful passions to her, but definitely she got hungry, she could suffer. And I know you're going to go that unlike our Lord Jesus Christ, who voluntarily assumed those blameless passions, Mary was naturally subject to them because she's not God. But
and so
the way we view original sin is basically just like the lack of goodness. We don't really include the blameless passions so much, even though we could say that definitely they're a result of the fall, like losing the preternatural gifts, losing the impassibility. We don't consider those like the stain or sinful marks on your soul, or the bent of your soul towards evil. And that's why we say that the Virgin Mary does not have this sinful bent towards evil, and basically that she was always in a state of grace, a special exemption done from the grace. It's from God. She doesn't earn this herself. Obviously, how could she? Just becoming into existence, being conceived. There's nothing she could do to earn this special privilege. It's something done specifically by God.
So it would be, and so, and maybe we'll have to table this, but would it sound like, could your position be, everything sounds fine, good, it sounds like it works, but I would need to evaluate your Mariology to see if I could apply those concepts in the way that I find acceptable?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And just as a sneak peek for Subdeacon Daniel Kakis's channel, I think January 2nd, Reverend showing Julianism. This is the big issue that separates Julian Helicanarsis and Severus, is the whether or not Christ had blameless passions. And you think that'd be such an obvious thing, but this is what, if people pay enough attention, this is actually a big issue of difference.
Well, this is something I don't know, so you can enlighten me on this.
We will have a whole episode on that on Subdeacon Daniel Kakis's channel, so you have to stay tuned. So let's talk about the Immaculate Conception, or lack thereof, because it looks like we've solved one issue. One issue could be solved if the next issue could be solved, which maybe it can't be. And so how about we'll start with you, Matt, because you're already alluding to it. What is the Immaculate Conception? Why do you believe it? Why is it necessary? Why should we believe it?
So we believe, so the Immaculate Conception is basically that what I explained original sin earlier, the lack of grace, that you come into existence needing grace. This was not the case for the Blessed Virgin Mary. The Blessed Virgin Mary was created, her soul was created in that state of grace, which our first parents lost. Now, it's not that if our first parents never lost that grace, then there would be no need for any kind of Immaculate Conception for anyone. This is obvious. This is an exception, and it's done purely out of the goodness of God, out of the grace of God for her. She did not earn this. It's like I said, it's impossible for Mary to have earned this at her conception. That wouldn't even make any sense. So, lost my train of thought a little bit. So she comes in to existence in a state of grace, and she does not have a sinful bent towards sin. She's not subject to concupiscence, whereas the rest of us are. Now, she is still subject to natural proclivities like the blameless passions. She is still subject to those. She is not exempt from every single ramification of the fall, but she is exempt from the lack of grace, and exempt from the tendency towards evil.
What do you think of that, Subdeacon?
Obviously, in Oriental Orthodoxy, and particularly Syriac Orthodoxy, I should say, we don't believe that, because the early saints, even before the schism, they told us that she received the robe of glory back in the Annunciation. That was her baptism, they said explicitly these words. So before that, if she had died, would she have gone to be with the righteous in Abraham's bosom? Sure, of course. But we don't believe that she was conceived with that robe of glory. She received it in the Annunciation.
Yeah, and I would say, because of course I could talk about this for hours, so I'll just say very shortly that the Theotokos was not created in the same state as Adam and Eve, because again she was born in a corruptible state, a state subject to the passions, a state where she had to turn from passions. It wasn't that natural default we talked about, where just as a default, you always do God's will, you always do God's works. It's not something you actually have to turn from. You have to correct your own tropos, your own way to not want to do it, and then do it right? And so that being the case, it would seem to me that when you said that Mary's created the same state as Adam and Eve, that state is actually maybe.
I don't know if I said that.
I think you said, but it's half the state. Maybe it seems to me that there seems to be a dualistic quality of what she has with no original sin and what she doesn't. So, like, it sounds to me that you're saying she doesn't have concupiscence, but she still has all the effects of sin, like corruptibility and death, and even certain aspects of concupiscence, the way that the Oriental and Eastern traditions that understand it, such as blameless passions. I think there's this whole paradigm, which I don't think even exists. So, Subdeacon, you'll have to give me your view on this, which is the doctrine of nomic will that comes out in the Sixth Ecumenical Council, obviously in the writings of St. Maximus. And the idea is that nomic willing, ultimately speaking, it cannot exist in someone that's in a sinless state. It's a result of sin. And in fact, it's because nomic will exist that you could corrupt and die, because it makes you not the default always doing God's will. It makes you either not want to or not sure what his will or not, or be confused as to what's good, what's not good.
Go ahead, Craig.
And so being that that's the case, and that the fathers categorically ascribe aspects of the Theotokos life where she exhibits nomic will, where, let's say, Christ has to correct her about in the wedding at Cana, the issue with of course at the cross, when she had the momentary doubts that were removed like lightning, to quote St. Maximus, about Christ's work, that this would exhibit the existence of nomic will, which is impossible because corruptibility and death is a result of that nomic will. And so it would seem to me that you would have to say, well, the Theotokos could have nomic will. She could have blameless passions. She never thought anything or done anything bad, which we'd agree with you about. But corruptibility and death it's not caused by any of that stuff, which then seems to create a massive split in how we see these things connected in the Eastern Orthodox way. So I'm going to give Subdeacon Daniel Kakish an opportunity to clarify, to oppose, to whatever, and then I'll give you an opportunity to speak back to that, Matt. So how about you first, Subdeacon?
Sure. Before I start, I just want to let you know our Assyrian friend might be hopping on soon.
All right, so send them the link. Then we're going to get the Nestorians on board.
Yeah. And then, so to answer the question, just so I know I'm understanding, you're asking essentially so I want to clarify too, we don't believe Mary practically sinned in the Syriac tradition.
No, she didn't sin at all.
Yeah. And but I think your question is, was her lack of sin due to her free will or her inability to sin? And we would say it was due to her free will. I think that's what you're asking, right?
Well, that's not exactly what I mean by, because there's two kinds of nomic wills, actually. If you're going to go in the Greek and have the Greeks, because nomic will just means free will.
Yeah.
But there's, according to St. Maximus, there is non-fallen or unfallen nomic will, which means actual free will, like the scriptures say, that would be free indeed. You could be a slave to sin or a slave to righteousness. Yeah. Being a slave to righteousness is true free will, right? Because you're actually operating according to the natural state. You're willing God's will. You're doing God's works. That's what true freedom is. That's what we were built to do.
Yeah.
Slavery to sin is actually the opposite, right? You lose that freedom. So you think you're freely choosing what you want, but you're not choosing according to nature anymore, right? Because human nature is good. You're created to will good things.
So I think,
and so what we call nomic will is really that fallen free will, that it's not willing according to nature anymore.
So what we believe is that whereas Eve did not have a disadvantage, Mary had a disadvantage, and that's what makes her greater than Eve. Because she overcame that disadvantage that Eve didn't have.
Yes, it's Saint John Maximovich, who's a Russian saint in the 20th century, even says that's her greatest merit, and that's his basis for rejecting the Immaculate Conception, is that the fact that the Theotokos overcomes sin, right? She overcomes sin to the point where we believe that she attained to the state where she voluntarily died because she overcame sin, that she undid original sin. So to say she was born without it undoes, like, that's how she won, so to say, right? She won the competition. She undid original sin. So it's like putting the cart before the horse, literally. And now, so Matt, this is your opportunity to say, I'm not down with this Nicea 2025. This is too crazy.
No, okay.
The floor is yours.
There's a few things that, Craig, that I think you should know. And I've told you this before, but but maybe if you forgot, or for everyone else's benefit, obviously, who's watching this stream, we do not say that it was logically impossible for Mary to commit a sin.
Eve committed sin.
I'm sorry, say what?
Eve had no original sin and she sinned.
Right. And so, but even with the Blessed Virgin, even with what we ascribe to her, and of course the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, technically it was possible that she could have fallen through free will. Which, and if you're going to say that if that is the case, then she did have what you call the gnomic will. Which the only difference then is that you think that if you're going to say that she has a gnomic will, then kind of according to the Eastern definition of original sin, then she had to have it, because if it's possible for you to sin, then you have a gnomic will, and therefore you have original sin. That's not how we look at it, of course. We do not view the gnomic will as being tied into original sin or the stain. So that's why I think if we reformulate and, or maybe like, if you just stick with the Latin definition of original sin that I told you earlier, you'd have no problem. But
I just think if you stuck with the Sixth Ecumenical Council, you'd have no problem.
Yeah, well,
so, and it does seem.
Did Craig freeze?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. It's just you and me, Daniel, for a little bit here then. So yeah, when you say that you don't think that Mary had the glory or grace prior to the Annunciation.
It's actually, it's not.
Okay. Maybe we'll have to table that. Or Craig, you cut out for a bit.
Yep,
Yeah,
no, I'm back,
like
hopefully. And guys,
minute.
take the ball and run if I disappear. But so yeah, it seems to me that the whole Roman Catholic doctrine, original sin, the whole anthropology, and I'm not saying this to be like a jerk apologist, it literally seems to exist in a vacuum separated from the Sixth Ecumenical Council. And so that vacuum not necessarily is bad, because it seems like the Oriental Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox, though, are very close on this without the sort of clarification. It just sounds like the Eastern Orthodox have this other advanced theological vocabulary for it. But it seems like that the Roman Catholic side, despite having that council, almost seems to have derived their anthropology without really using that as the backbone of it. I'm not saying you reject
I need
it.
to look at it again, but is there anything in the Sixth Ecumenical Council that says gnomic will equals original sin? Like,
Long story short, the whole issue gnomic will actually is, if that's all things surrounding Honorius and everything. So the answer is yes. Right? That's what they're speaking to when they're talking about that issue.
Okay,
yes, that whole
I'll check the
paradigm
citation on that. Yeah.
I'm not going to get it's not one sentence. That's what you have to read. You could
Okay.
read the 18th session of the council and you're going to get all that meat. I'd say if you read the first session and the 18th session, you're pretty much going to get everything you need to know about it. But that's pretty much the whole paradigm at work. And the fact that when you speak to a Roman Catholic, this paradigm it's like it comes out of left field, is kind of interesting, because if we talked about Chalcedon, which we're going to get to, Subdeacon, if we talk about Chalcedon and the distinctives there, wouldn't be. And so it almost seems like the Sixth Council was put on the books, but what it taught was just kind of not seriously systematized in Thomas Aquinas and other authorities.
I don't think you consider us Roman Catholics as explicitly denying it, though. And if you look at it, at least from the perspective that I gave you, where we can acknowledge that the Virgin Mary does have this gnomic will, but it's not concupiscence. We would make that distinction, that the possibility of sin is not equal to the proclivity to sin. So those are
now, and well, here's what Eastern Orthodox will say, and then we're going to do a recap because we have the Assyrian Biblicist on board. We're going to try to get the Nestorians in on the union. Assyrian Biblicist, it's great that you're here.
Thank you for having me.
So, man, I got so excited about Assyrian Biblicist, I forgot I was saying to you, Matthew. So that being said, the Eastern Orthodox, we have several saints that teach that not one passionate thought ever came to the Theotokos mind. Not one lustful thought came to her mind. Not one sinful thought about anything came into her mind. So it's not that we're saying that she's thinking about sinful stuff. That's not the teaching of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Rather, the issue is she had the proclivity where it could even occur. And so through spiritual discipline, she prevented it from occurring since her very conception. By the operation of her will turning against the fallen tropos, she corrected her fallen tropos.
There's nothing. There's nothing in the dogma of Immaculate Conception that I think that contradicts that.
And so, if you're willing, so you would say the Roman Catholic side to be willing to clarify that what we mean by no original sin is that the Theotokos actively she inherited the fallenness of Adam when it comes to death. The fallenness of Adam, where unlike Eve, she actually had to actively turn from sin, but she did so from her very conception by the grace of God so perfectly, not even a single sinful thought, anything that you would call concupiscence occurred her entire life.
Correct. And also the further fact that her soul was always in a state of grace, in a state of life to God, whereas the rest of human race, comes into existence dead to sin. She does not. And I wanted to talk to you, Daniel, about this because you mentioned that you don't think, although you said that she would not have, she would have gone to Abraham's bosom prior to the Annunciation, like that, that's not enough. I think in terms, we would agree, of course, but from the Roman perspective, well, I guess everyone goes to Abraham's bosom prior to Christ's ascension, obviously. So that's still the case, but we would have to say that she was always at enmity with the devil. We, of course, we like to point to Genesis 3:15, the proto-evangelium of the woman's seed that will crush the head of the serpent, and where God says specifically to the serpent, "I will put enmity between you and the woman." That There was never any point in the Virgin Mary's life, from the moment her life began to on into eternity now, where she was in a state of dead to sin. And basically, because if you're in a state of dead in your sin, then you're in league with the devil to a certain extent. You're on the devil's team.
Yeah,
and,
we
have to insist that was never the case.
Right. I think we would all agree on that. I don't think any of us would.
All right, good.
Yeah.
I would say we'd put the emphasis, like St. Leo, St. Augustine, that the Annunciation is a pivotal, and St. Ephrem the Syrian, by the way, was the pivotal moment that pretty much seals the deal on that she can never be an enemy of the devil, because that's officially in our mind her baptism.
Mm-hmm. She was baptized later, right? If I remember tradition correctly,
but she was never an enemy of the devil, because, like what I just established, that since the moment of conception she had the grace of God and had always turned away from the fallen tropos, correcting her tropos from conception. Yeah. And so thereby to the point where she corrected her tropos so there was an unfallen tropos at the Annunciation.
Because she never sinned. So if she was in league with the devil, she would have sinned. But she never sinned,
Well, yeah.
Well, we've made amazing steps so far. We got 3 check marks so far. I'm going to review, and then we're going to have the Assyrian Biblicist, who is the Nestorian delegation to this council, Nicea 2025. See if you get on board. So here's what we solved so far. Can I just call you Assyrian if that's okay?
Yep, no problem. No problem.
All right, and so Assyrian, this is what
you can call me Jonah if that's easier for you.
Jonah, that is easier. It's less syllables. So Jonah, here's what we've come up with. We solved the issue of purgatory, because we agreed that after death is there's of course those in heaven, there's those who are in hell, and those who are neither in heaven nor hell that are through the prayers of church, good works, alms, commemorations at the Eucharist, are benefiting and will attain to salvation. That we could reduce purgatory from the Roman Catholic popular perception to simply being not a literal third place, but the state of those souls that are benefiting from the prayers of church, that have not yet attained to, but will attain to salvation. So before I get any further into that, how about you say whether that sounds good, and if you want to add your perspective of what the Assyrian doctrine is for that, Jonah.
I agree with that, and especially in the Church of the East tradition, later on, like in the time of Solomon of Basra especially, he has a book called the Book of the Bee. In the Book of the Bee, specifically chapter 56. I can pull it up right now. He gives a description of a state of the soul, and it sounds very much like.
Please read it. I don't know how to share screen. If you could just read it, go right ahead.
Yep, I'll get it right now. Give me one moment.
So Assyrian's looking up, and I'm going to ask the panel as he's looking it up. Subdeacon Daniel, are you an ecumenist? Yes or no?
No.
Catholic Matt, are you an ecumenist? Yes or no?
Definitely not in the leftist liberal sense. Definitely not.
No. So the answer is no.
Yep.
Me, no, I'm not an ecumenist. Jonah, are you an ecumenist? Yes or no?
I am not an ecumenist, which.
So this is very interesting conversation. We're all conservatives. All right.
Yeah,
so
I got
Jonah, you got it in front of you.
Yep.
Let's go.
Saint Solomon of Basra says, when the soul goes forth from the body, as Abba Isaiah says, the angels go with it. Then the hosts of darkness go forth to meet it, seeking to seize it and examine it. If there be anything of theirs in it, then the angels do not fight with them, but those deeds which the soul has wrought protect it and guard it, that they come not near it. So it's talking about how as the soul departs from the body, the hosts of darkness, being demons, will examine it and test it. I don't know about you guys, but to me, that sounds pretty much like toll houses.
Yep, we agree with you on that. And how about, and so those who go through the toll houses, are they after like the traditional and Eastern Orthodox 40 days, but without any literal amount of days, after a period of time when you go through those trials with those angels, is there a period of time where a soul can be in a state of suffering, damnation, whatever you call it, but then through the prayers of the church is liberated from that state, or do you not have that view?
Yeah, I believe that view is there also in the fathers, like Daniel, Subdeacon, he illustrated with Saint Ephraim and prayers to the departed. We have that as well. So after that state, there is a state where, there is temporary suffering. I believe you find that in Saint Isaac of Nineveh as well, who's big for us. He speaks a lot about, temporal punishment.
And Jonah, Isaac and Nineveh, universalist, yes or no?
I've heard the arguments for him being a universalist, but I don't take the position that he is. I don't think he is. That kind of defeats the whole point of his books on repentance, honestly.
All right. Well, thank you that you've clarified. Thank you for clarifying that. And so the ancillary doctrine to purgatory would be indulgences, and we've come to the compromise that if we understand indulgences with a disciplinary exemption, that meaning the whole Roman Catholic way of categorizing them as partial, plenary, because that's a discipline, whether something's partial or plenary, within the Roman Catholic system, that can't be known infallibly. That could theoretically be incorrect. And so while they could maintain the discipline, we don't have to affirm that the discipline is actually accurate. And so then we can understand indulgences merely as the bishop who gives it, recognizing that the good work or the prayer or whatever done on behalf of someone else or for the individual is beneficial for that person's salvation. So if we had that minimalistic view of indulgences, is that something acceptable to you, Jonah, making you the pretend legate to the Assyrian delegation, this council?
Yeah, I think that's acceptable. I think that's a good compromise. And it's indulgences are one of those things where we have bigger issues. We have we don't have, obviously we don't accept the same councils, and I feel like I'm fine with that compromise, but I think that in a situation like this where we're speaking about reunification, there are bigger issues that we must tackle before we get into disciplinary issues, if that makes sense.
We wanted to start small and simple with basically these movements first.
Yeah. And so next step, to save us time, instead of recapping all our views of original sin, how about you give your view, and then we could all say yes or no and see if we could move forward.
Subdeacon Daniel pretty much covered it with the robe of glory.
Just so you guys know that before the schisms, Syriac Orthodox and Assyrian Church of the East shared the same early.
Matt's wife had a cameo. I saw her.
The same.
Yeah,
the same.
Subdeacon Daniel pretty much covered it. Yeah.
And so then was the formulation that Eastern Orthodox gave, does that sound too developed, or does that sound consistent with the conceptually, maybe not terminologically, with what you would accept?
I think that's consistent. A lot of our inspiration on these matters come from who you guys all know, Theodore of Mopsuestia. He wrote a book on, challenging the original sin, and I don't think that issue of original sin is conflated between, or is contradictory between the Church of the East and the Eastern Orthodox. And I would illustrate this with the comments of Photius of Constantinople. Photius of Constantinople went over Theodore's works on original sin, and he agreed with their assessments. So I think that just by that alone, I don't see us, contradictory there. So I have no issue with the Eastern Orthodox position.
Now we're going to move forward, and we're going to go to Mariology, and then we'll be all at the same spot. Now with Mariology, the issue is, ultimately speaking, that whether we could accept that Mary was created in the state not identical to Eve. She was able to corrupt and die. She had what I said, anomic will, meaning her will could turn to sin, wasn't in the same natural state of Eve, which always perfectly cooperated and willed with God's. But she always had the grace of God from conception to correct that fallen way of operating, of that tropos of willing, and so doing to the point that she completely undid any sense of sin in her life, particularly at the Annunciation, and she had to voluntarily die as a result. So how's that sound, or how's that inconsistent with Assyrian Mariology?
I don't think that's inconsistent with, the Assyrian Mariology, especially since from the very first book of the Bible in Genesis 3:16 or Genesis 3:15, she's known to have all enmity with the serpent. So she has a special type of grace from the moment of her conception that no other creature has. And she did have potential to sin. And I think that, that's a view that some of the fathers take. I think that Chrysostom takes that view. I think one can argue St. Ambrose takes that view. But as for Mariology, I think you got it there.
All right. Well, we've gone already much farther that I think we were able to accomplish. Now this can get very hard. We're going to need all hands on deck for Matt here. And we're going to get to the papacy. And so we're going to give the Roman Catholic here the opportunity to talk about the papacy, what it is, what we ought to accept, and then I'm going to give everyone in the panel the opportunity to give their view of what the role is for the Bishop of Rome. And we're as non-ecumenists, we're going to see whether this is possibly reconciled. So Matt, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm starting already at a disadvantage here because actually tonight I thought I was just gonna, I'll be honest, I thought it was just going to be Craig and myself. So Mr. Jonah and Subdeacon Daniel, I mean, y'all are probably going to even get me a little bit more than Craig is over here because I didn't really prepare for y'all. But here's what I will say. I am perfectly fine. And I do believe that that the First Vatican Council, which of course none of you all accept, but I believe that basically what it said, I do see bishops of Rome acting in a very consistent way with Vatican I in the first millennium. Now, a lot of that may be post Council of Chalcedon and Ephesus. So that's why I think I'm in a disadvantage with you guys. But with Craig, and I think Craig has acknowledged this to me, that we definitely see bishops of Rome in the first millennium, the first 1,000 years of the church, acting in such a way as to where they fully believe that they had a kind of primacy and jurisdiction over the universal church. Now, I am fully willing to allow all the particular churches of the East their own canon law, appoint their own bishops. And I think that's the way the church in the first millennium did function. And if we were all to reunify, I would not want to change that at all. I would not want the Bishop of Rome trying to micromanage anyone and everything. Quite frankly, that's, I think, like, there's too much of that as it is going on right now. More so in the last century or so than not the whole 2,000 years of the church notwithstanding. So in terms of the jurisdiction, I do think that there is a special place for the Bishop of Rome, obviously, and if you want to say, you know, like a place of primacy, that's fine, but it has to mean something. It can't just mean, oh, you know, yeah, they have a primacy in the first place, but that's, you know, being first really isn't any different from being, you know, fifth or sixth or
last.
321st. You know, I mean, so like it has to actually mean something. There has to be something specific to that. And you know, Matt Schneider, go on somewhere else, will you? So it does have to mean something. It has to mean that there's an actual authority that the Bishop of Rome does have in the universal church. And I think in the first millennium, a lot of that was like the right to appeal. You know, there was still a final court of appeal to the Bishop of Rome. Even if the patriarch of your own particular church ruled against you, you could still appeal to the Bishop of Rome, who could rule against that patriarch. And I think that we did see that occurred in the first millennium. And I think that's a lot of things that caused, you know, the schisms in the church and you know, after the Council of Ephesus and after the Council of Chalcedon. So that's kind of where I'm going to go with the papacy for now in terms of reunification.
We'll stop.
Particular authority.
We'll address infallibility next. So with the jurisdictional stuff we saw, Jonah, what do you think about what you heard? What should be reduced? What is acceptable? What is? How about you give us your perspective?
Yeah. So for us, I'm gonna be honest. The papacy for us is off the table. Yeah, it's for us at least. It's not going to happen, and that goes back to us all the way to the Synod of 424 of Mardadisho, where in the Synod he declares his autocephaly, and our church says this is very early, prior to any schism.
424.
424. Our patriarch says, or our Synod says, that no other bishop, no man shall judge our patriarch except God alone. Right. So that's our Synod very early on, pretty much saying that our jurisdiction is our jurisdiction and nobody is to come into our jurisdiction. And the whole point of that was, you know, we've had disputes, and the argument was every time our patriarch has been right. Subdeacon Daniel is very educated on this council specifically.
Just to be clear on that, and a little stronger of a detail from that council is they particularly say any Western bishop, meaning in the Roman Empire, because they're in the East, they're in the Persian Empire. There's no appeals allowed to any Western bishop. No one can judge, not even the Synod can judge the patriarch, only God alone. Yeah. And he's the successor of Peter, and all the things that the Catholics say about
that. Sounds basically you're just making the same claim, just done from
right. Yeah. But imagine if Rome had this in 424.
We would never hear the end of it. Yeah. So as well,
sounds like Vatican I come early, you know.
Okay. Well, so, I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, I just one last thing. About in 2015 or 2016, the patriarch of the Chaldean Catholic Church, after Mordechai IV reposed, reached out to us for reunification. And His Holiness Marawa, at the time he was a bishop, he responded in a letter. And I have the letter now. I just want to read a quick portion. He says, "By divine design, beyond the grasp of men, the Church of the East is autocephalous and the continuous canonical Church of the Eastern Middle East, India, Central Asia, and China. It would be a violation of the Orthodox and Catholic faith as manifested throughout the ages to consider this tradition as belonging to the Roman See. For any outside see or jurisdiction claiming canonical jurisdiction over the Church of the East. Indeed, if a church is under the jurisdiction of any Western bishop, then the church cannot legitimately be heir of the name Church of the East." So after that, there's also been many calls for unification, and we've rejected them all on the basis of the papacy. We can't truly be called the Church of the East if we are bound to the Roman See and under the jurisdiction of a Western bishop. So that would be our position.
and Matt, you're gonna have an opportunity, but I may try to bridge the gap. So I'm gonna have you wait for a little bit. Subdeacon Daniel, do you have anything to add for things that what Matt said, and whether you concur or disagree with Jonah here?
As a Syriac Orthodox, or for the Church of the East?
Well, you're Syriac Orthodox, so you're the legate of their church.
Yeah, okay. I'm just making sure if you wanted me to add anything to his. So we would say essentially the same thing. That we view the Bishop of Rome to be Catholics hate when we say this, but the first among equals and having primacy of honor and all that. Yeah. But that's pretty much it. He's the patriarch of the West, just like how the Coptic Pope is the patriarch of his area and the Syriac patriarch is the patriarch of his area. And in the case of Constantinople or the Church of the East, the patriarchs of their areas. So just like all of them are patriarchs, the Bishop of Rome is a patriarch. He has no universal jurisdiction over anyone. He cannot speak infallibly on matters of faith and morals. So I really don't know.
We're gonna table infallibility for a moment, and we're gonna try to hash that out. Sure. So Subdeacon, do you accept the principle that a theological appeal could be made to Rome? Rome could give a local judgment. So in Rome, it's binding. They decide who's in communion, who's not. And that they could recognize the holy orders of people, or they cannot, locally speaking, and thereby extend communion to people in that situation. Locally, presuming it's not the absolute final say on the issue and an ecumenical council is that acceptable to you?
Yeah. Locally, it's not they don't have the final say. And even to be fair, let me be fair. Even the synod that Jonah just mentioned in the Church of the East, we would disagree with that too. Like, there's no patriarch that cannot be deposed or that a synod can't judge. I don't even know if they would still agree with themselves on that, to be honest.
Well, let's ask Jonah right now. So it seems like Subdeacon accepts. I'm just going to put it in very few words because you already heard what I asked.
Yeah.
Non-ultimately binding appeals, but appeals that have the authority for Rome to extend communion, to recognize orders, and for them to have moral authority, so that then they would have to rise to ecumenical council. Is that something that you find acceptable, or that cannot be squared whatsoever with the canons of your church?
Yeah, so like Subdeacon said, locally there's no problem. The issue would be with us is if they were to dictate our jurisdiction, where we would be bound to whatever they say. That would be the issue there. But as for locally, there would be no issue. We're not against appealing to other bishops for aid. It's happened all throughout history. But the issue would be dictating our jurisdiction. To give an example to Matt, we were told that we would have to submit all of our prayers and liturgies and hymns and everything, our rights, to Rome, so that Rome can approve them to be. Rome's going to approve our stuff. We've been doing it for 2,000 years. How do they know about our stuff? Yeah, that's pretty much how I would put it,
All right, well, but I think we established, because I'm trying to now put what we could accept before, what we think we can accept, but what we could accept. So Rome could take appeals, that they carry the moral authority that Rome could extend to the communion if they accept the appeal and they rule in favor of whoever's appealing. Rome in isolation, before I get to that. And so they carry that moral authority, but they're only finally binding in an ecumenical council. And so that's something I, as an Eastern Orthodox, could accept. And we're going to get into Ephesus and Chalcedon maybe very briefly, because that's more like rivalry stuff than doctrinal stuff for the moment.
Yeah.
But so that being said, from what you just heard before I'll get to one more thing. So from what you just heard, Matt, is that acceptable, or could the ecumenical council in no context be the only mechanism to make this binding?
Yeah, I have to. As far as I understand it, I don't think it could be only the ecumenical council. I do think the Pope has, per Vatican I, I do think he has the authority to do it himself. However, in terms of, when you're talking about there, in terms of like submission, like give me all your stuff and we'll tell you how much of it that you can keep. I do think that is, quite frankly, I think that's a bit silly. that's kind of silly, and that should not be the case. So I don't think that, like I said, I don't want the Pope micromanaging every particular church. I think it's happening too often now within the Roman communion as it is. And so far be it from me to want it to continue when we're trying to get back together. Like that seems a bit absurd to me.
And that now, I think so you would say, Matt, then that the Pope unilaterally could issue a binding deposition of a patriarch that does not require the consent of other patriarchs. Yes or no?
Good question, and I could be wrong, but I think so.
Okay,
could be wrong though.
And so, Jonah, could you accept any circumstance if there's a consent of all the patriarchs, presuming you were communing with them, right? Obviously, you're not going to accept those you're not communing, but presuming you're communing with them, could you accept that your patriarch could be deposed by a consensus of the patriarchs and then a new one elected by your own synod? Is that acceptable or not acceptable according to your canons?
Yeah, that is acceptable.
Okay,
that is acceptable. Yeah, it wouldn't be done. Yeah, it wouldn't be done by an individual bishop. So the synod that I mentioned, where it says no one but God can judge him, how I interpret that would be the fathers say, like Saint Athanasius, many, that the Holy Spirit is with the ecumenical councils. So when a patriarch is deposed by an ecumenical council, that would be considered the will of God. So that would be in the case where the patriarch can be deposed. The patriarch is not above an ecumenical council.
Okay. And so it seems to me what we can hammer out thus far is agreement between the Assyrian, the Syriac, and the Eastern Orthodox on this issue of ecclesiology. It seems that this is something that Rome maybe could accept, maybe cannot accept. And so now the question would be whether or not I could maybe frame this in a way which could be acceptable to you, Matt. And so this is now the olive branch. You ready?
Okay.
And so could we accept that due to the Pope being able to post something, he operates in concert with other patriarchs, that it's binding for the Pope personally, right? That for your jurisdiction, when he deposes someone, that decides for your jurisdiction who's in, who's out, whose holy orders are good, whose are not good. That is completely up to your discretion. But that in jurisdictions outside of yours, that their consent is necessary in order to establish for themselves whether they recognize this, whether they concur. Is that acceptable? Yes or no?
It sounds like it could be. And again, like there may be people who correct me and, come back at me and say, no, that's not in line with Vatican I. And they lay the smackdown on me. If that happens, that happens. But from what you said, I think that sounds okay.
All right, so just on that, you as a legate will have to return to your synod and see if they accept it. It won't be the first time a legate was rejected at Rome. But okay, so we've now established that. Let's now talk about infallibility. Matt, how about you give us the 1 minute or less definition of papal infallibility? We'll pose it to the panel and we'll see what we could do to work through this issue.
Okay, well, predictably, I'm probably not going to like this, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you it anyway. It's the three, conditions that the Pope must fill in order to be speaking in an infallible manner. He has to be invoking his apostolic authority, or ex cathedra. It has to be from the chair, as in he is saying this as the successor of Peter, and it has to be on a matter of faith and morals. You can't say from the chair, I bind that, here tomorrow's winning lottery numbers. Nah, doesn't work. Even he could try to say that. He could try to say that from the chair, but it wouldn't be infallible at that point. So all these three conditions are necessary. Not one of them is sufficient on themselves. So ex cathedra, on faith and morals, and the final one is binding. Is he intends to bind everyone, not just a particular thing. Because if he does the first two, and then he says something to only for maybe only one particular diocese in communion with Rome, that would be a use of his binding authority, but it wouldn't be an infallible decision that can never be reversed. Or that would probably be a disciplinary matter in that sense. But when he's talking about a dogma of faith and morals from the chair, as in invoking his apostolic authority, and to the entire universal church, the Holy Spirit protects the visible principle of the unity of the church from committing a catastrophic error in that sense. Because in doing so, if the alternative, if the visible principle of the unity of the church were to invoke his apostolic authority and bind the entire faithful on the matter of faith and morals to a heresy, the whole religion collapses. And so the Holy Spirit is going to keep the whole religion from collapsing.
Okay, and so I'm going to go with you first, Subdeacon Daniel, then I'll go with Jonah. How's that sound to you, Subdeacon?
I have a question for Matt before I answer, really quick. Matt, do you consider the Tome of Leo ex cathedra or by a council?
It's another good question. I'm pretty sure I would consider it yes. I would consider it ex cathedra.
Okay. And then, so in that circumstance, you would say that we would have to accept it, correct?
Yeah, probably, yeah. Without the delving deep further, and I'm at a disadvantage here. I didn't prepare for you.
Sure, no worries.
But yeah. Without doing any further digging, yes.
So I respect Matt's explaining it in the way he did to make it easier on our ears, but I still think that is something that I don't see us accepting.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think that we would ever accept that, because for us it would have to be found in our tradition, which, the Syriac tradition that both me and Subdeacon have inherited. We don't believe it's present there, and we don't believe it's present in the scriptures either. One can make the argument, obviously, but for us that would also be something off the table, with all due respect.
No, that's fine. Would you at least acknowledge that, because obviously from the Latin tradition, obviously Leo, the Tome of Leo, is going to be in that Latin tradition. So that's part of the tradition that I've inherited.
Yeah.
Along with, like Pope Agatho and
I acknowledge.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, we acknowledge the position, and we understand where you're coming from, but for us, that would not be something that we would be able to accept based on our tradition and based on the just the wide range of the church.
When he's saying our, I want to just expand a little bit. When he's saying our tradition, what we mean is like when the fathers delivered the faith to us and told us, like, here's the Trinity, here's the incarnation, here's the sacraments and the priesthood and everything you need for salvation. But nobody told us that there's a Bishop of Rome that we need, that this is applicable about.
Yeah, it's not in the deposit of faith for us.
Yeah. I get it. Yeah.
And so, I would of course agree in principle with Jonah and Subdeacon Daniel here, but let me try to give Matt the opportunity to clarify matters, because Matt, would you accept that Pope Honorius was an anathematized heretic?
Yeah, it kind of sounds like it, yeah.
All right, and so, and would you at least accept the theoretical possibility that Pope Vigilius, before he condemned the 3 chapters, that it was heretical for him not to condemn the 3 chapters?
Yeah, I mean, heretical for him not to do. He misunderstood it, I think, and we can get into the whole historical thing.
And we're gonna get into that. So if it just stopped there, it would have been heretical for him to do that, right?
Well, yeah, if he had, because they were objectively, I guess you could say, objectively heretical things that he subjectively thought were Orthodox, and he subjectively himself was Orthodox. So
okay, yeah. And so being that for practical purposes, Matt from the Roman Catholic delegation could accept that there are popes that do commit heretical errors and do teach heretical errors. one could even argue teach heretical errors to the whole world. For example, the council that Vigilius held against the Fifth Council initially, when he wrote the first constitution. But the criteria for infallibility that Matt is expounding doesn't say that can occur. What he's saying that when the Pope intends to teach doctrine to the whole church, all the hokey pokey that he just gave, that this is when infallibility goes into place. So now let me pose this to you, Matt, and see if you can accept this. Intent is necessary. Correct intent is necessary for infallibility to actually be operative. Correct, Matt?
Yeah, intent is in intending to bind the faith.
Right. He intends to bind. He tends to teach on faith and morals specifically, not in something disciplinary.
Right.
He tends to teach it to the whole world,
and he's
all
saying,
the Catholic, Orthodox faithful.
And he's basically saying, I'm saying this as, the Apostle Peter is saying it, essentially.
And so intent is necessary for all of this. He actually has to tend to do all this. So just because, let's say, these days, the Pope can send an email, click send all, right? But like if there is some sort of problem with his ISP and someone doesn't get to receive the email, that wouldn't mean that he didn't intend to teach infallibly, right?
Right. Yeah. The intent was there.
The intent was there. And so let me pose you this. Is it humanly, epistemically possible to know the intent of any human being?
Well, if they tell you,
this is a very important question. So now you got to. Generally speaking, can we know the intent of any human being?
Unless you want to say, do you know someone's lying? Do you know when someone's lying to you? I guess if you want to say could the Pope say all those three specific things and be lying about it? And it would be like about it, like psych, gotcha. It
would be like, well, God forbid I say something heretical, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, whether or not I'm saying something formally heretical, and formally would be I intend it to really be this heresy, or I say something heretical because I got material facts wrong, right? I didn't understand something, I didn't understand a term or whatever. I didn't mean to say that, but what came out was incorrect.
It was incorrect, yeah.
So intent is the deciding factor, whether or not I purposely went emphatically to say something heretical, or whether I said something heretical but not emphatically, based up with correct intention but with bad facts at my disposal. That there doesn't mean it's good, doesn't mean I'll go to heaven. It would be different. And so my question would be then, is it humanly possible for that intent to ever be known with certainty?
I'm still having a little bit of trouble, I guess.
Because if I can make the same heresy could be a material error or formal error.
Right.
The only deciding factor is whether or not the intent is there to formally teach error.
And usually, when we talk about formal heresy, it's usually about obstinate refusal to receive correction.
Yes,
and that's everyone's going to make mistakes at some point. Everyone's going to make a mistake. I've definitely made theological mistakes before, and it's when people bring the information to you, is like, are you at least open to being corrected here, or are you going to obstinately persist in your error? That's when it becomes a sin.
But obstinance is a condition of the heart, and no man can know another man's heart. Would you agree with that?
Because
here's what I'm getting at.
If
we could put the Pope's intent into the category of not known with certainty, this would allow the Pope to, on paper, theoretically have infallibility, but there to be no certain way of knowing when he's doing anything infallible. And so it makes infallibility a non-issue because it's never actually enforced.
But it also, I can see where you're going with that, but it also, doesn't it make it practically useless?
Well, yeah, but the three of us think it's practically useless already.
Well,
I know you
think that.
But does this allow you to have your cake and us to have our cake?
I see.
And so that's what I'm trying to hammer out here.
That's. I'm sorry. I gotta. Maybe it's just me. If it's 3 against 1, that's fine. But I think here's where I'd have to have a problem. No, it has to be useful. it has to have a practical application here that the
But
church.
but where is that in the Vatican I definition?
I mean,
so it sounds to me you have the room. You have the room right now, Mr. Leggett. You can still get synodical reception later, where you could clarify your doctrine, where that there's no certainty behind that intent, and so we're not going to judge now how useful or not useful it is. That's not the point. The point is this is something that could exist in theory, but it's not something that we can have epistemic certainties enforce in any given moment.
Yeah, I could play nice with you and accept that, but I don't think I can here because honestly, that sounds just a little bit like too ecumenistically. That sounds too ecumenism to me. It's a little bit too indifferentist to just
because we all know you want to say yes, the Pope has intent. He had the intent to teach Immaculate Conception. That's ex cathedra. That's true.
We could never it seems that if I were to accept what you're saying, then with Ineffabilis Deus, the proclamation of the Immaculate Conception, someone could go, "Are you sure? Do you really? Was he really
exactly?" So it permits us to say, well, yes, you think that's binding, you think that's infallible, but because you concede that intent can never be known with certainty, there can be no certainty whether this is actually binding.
I might have to be a stick in the mud on this one.
I tried my best. It looks like this compromise on intent will not work. Now, let me just pose the rest of the panel. If, for whatever reason, he capitulated or got replaced by a flaming liberal legate, would we allow the Western jurisdiction, the jurisdiction of Rome, to have this high-minded idea if they would admit to the fact that there's no way of knowing if it's ever actually really happening? We don't have to accept it, therefore. Is that acceptable for the sake of charity, or is that just too insulting to your intelligent subdeacon?
It's not that it's insulting to my intelligence. It's that it's going to lead to another eventual thing where the Bishop of Rome is going to think he can do that again.
Yeah. All right. So you're seeing from a pastoral viewpoint, it's just dangerous to even have that door open in that weird sort of way. Jonah, how about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very dangerous in this case. And it's true that we can't know his intention, but I would ask you, would a Roman Catholic be able to argue that the Holy Spirit would be able to protect the decree either way? Or would they not be able to argue that?
Protect the decree and whether we recognize it or not, I guess. Is that your question?
Yeah. Regardless of the bishop's intent, as long as he is a valid bishop, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think, like Craig said, intent matters. He has to intend to do all those three things that I said. So if he's not intending to do those things, like I said, if you could somehow prove that maybe the Bishop of Rome said all these things, said that he was intending to do this, but he was lying, or that he said it, but he didn't really mean it, then the infallibility would not apply.
Yeah, so then I think that Craig's point stands there. And then if that were the case, that there is an infiltrator, then it would be very dangerous for the body.
Well, obviously, but I mean, that's I guess maybe I'll just have to say that, I trust the Holy Spirit to not let a demon, like a flat out lie, like demon, do something to that massive effect. Yeah,
right.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. But
I tried my best. I think that would have been the only logical workaround to let Rome expound their doctrine locally, but for it to be absolutely categorically meaninless. And if we could live with people with absolutely meaningless ideas or zero import, I think we could, if we were able to allow them to make their categories of thought to the point where they could recategorize them to where they're acceptable to us. So I'd actually be open to that if they said it's infallible, but we have no idea when it's infallible, and so it's absolutely not applicable. But I actually think, and I'll just leave it here, that because intent can never be known, it's just a basic spiritual thing. We don't judge anyone's intent on earth. Like, we can't know that. I think that utterly invalidates papal infallibility, not in theory, but in practice. But that could actually be a means of us bridging our differences on this. So I don't see that as a negative thing. but
Well,
the legate here will not accept it. So
yeah, the legate here will not accept. I'm sorry.
I think Craig has a valid point. I think Craig has a really valid point.
Well, no, I don't think so, because I mean, I guess maybe it's just a general thing here that I do when I'm talking to people. I guess unless you are like really intending to deceive me, I assume that you're giving me the straight dope. I mean, I assume that Jonah,
you'd assume wrong, though. You got no clue what they're thinking.
You can't accept this. You know, I mean, so that's unless I have a prior reason to really, really distrust someone on a topic like that.
Now, last comment on the papacy, because this is like that song in the 90s, Everything Falls Apart. And so last comment on the papacy would be direct jurisdiction. And this is the idea. How about you tell us very quickly, Matt, what direct jurisdiction is?
I mean, I guess you're saying that, direct jurisdiction is in, he can appoint the bishops. Well, okay. There's still another level of that where the Pope is the Bishop of Rome specifically. Like, he controls all the staffing there. Like, the Pope Francis can't control who the Bishop of Raleigh, North Carolina hires and fires. He can't do that. But he can, obviously he can appoint all the bishops in his communion, in the Latin communion. And so I guess if you want to say that that's direct jurisdiction there, that's fine. And I guess, again, I don't want the Bishop of Rome doing that with any other particular church, any other Eastern church. That should stay with it.
But does he maintain the right? Honestly, but he maintains the right, according to you, where he could appoint bishops elsewhere without their synods consenting.
As a matter of maybe divine law, maybe, but as a matter of canon law, I definitely wouldn't want that to be the case.
All right.
For example, if I don't know, a plague wiped out all bishops in a certain area, and you had no way to get one, what are you going to do? I mean, let me piggyback
on Matt here. When St. Ignatius was going to be martyred in Rome, he wrote to the Romans that they will be the bishop of Antioch. Right? He wrote that to them. And this is 50 years after the last book, the Bible, maybe less, depending on when Revelation was written.
Alexandria, right?
And our second example of this would be during and this is for Roman Catholic Eastern Orthodox history. It's not really relevant to your communions, Jonah and Subdeacon, but the principle is important, is that when there was, due to the caliphate, there were no bishops in large parts of the Antioch's and Jerusalem's jurisdiction, that Rome stepped back in again to fulfill that function to ordain bishops where there were none. And so then let me ask this, is a kind of direct jurisdiction okay if there's an absence and what the Bishop of Rome would be doing is like an emergency measure to make sure there's an episcopate where there's just presently none? Is that acceptable, or is even that too extreme? Let me give it to Jonah.
So I think, of course, it would, in this circumstance where it's like live or die, all or nothing, I think it would be fine. But I wouldn't say just the Bishop of Rome. I would say also the Bishop of Antioch would be able to do that for us as well.
That seems somewhat reasonable too.
Yeah. So because Antioch has been the church closest to us for about 2,000 years. So for us,
kind of important.
So for us, if we needed something, we would be able to appeal to Antioch, and Antioch would help us as well. So it wouldn't have to strictly be to the Bishop of Rome. For direct jurisdiction, for us, we wouldn't have an outside source elect our patriarch or our bishops, because how I see it is, of course, the people in that church know the church the best, and they would make the best possible decision for the sake of their laity. That wouldn't be from an outside source. That would be one way of looking at it.
And Subdeacon, your comments?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Like, as long as the emergency is not uniquely to Rome, it can be included, then that's fine. Whether it's Alexandria, Constantinople, whatever,
Okay, right. And it sounds to me that Legate Matt has already agreed to those conditions of direct jurisdiction. is in these situations where there's a void of bishops. He accepts that if someone else helps out in a situation, like another patriarchate, that's okay. And other than that, if Rome's involved within an ordination of a bishop, like I forget, I think it was Manus of Constantinople in 536, that he'd do so with the consent of the local synod. And so, is that all agreeable, Matt?
Yeah, and like as a general point, I mean, now we have this. This didn't used to be the case, of course. Going back, centuries and millennium. But now, of course, you have bishops like. A priest in one diocese will get appointed to a bishop all the way across the country, who will then get elevated to another bishopric in another part of the country, like hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And canonically, that's possible. I'm not going to say that the Pope is not allowed to do that, but that's not the way I wish things would happen. I kind of, the big believer in the principle of subsidiarity, where, maybe local communities should be able to kind of have more say in this. In terms of, hey, how about we kind of maybe, can we get someone from, our area to pastor to us, please? Rather
Decentralization.
Rather than, some dirt from, California whom I've never met. No, he may be a good, faithful Catholic. I hope he would be a good, faithful Catholic. So in the broad scheme of things, it should matter because we should all be believing the same things anyway. But subsidiarity, if it can be handed on the more local level, it should be.
It's now everything's about to fall apart right now. We got super close on paper and theory with almost every single topic.
We've made headway. Even with most the headway that we have made.
Yeah, I mean, with most of the papacy, supposedly we might have the Anglican delegate here. I don't know how to include him. So we got very close. We're gonna include our Anglican legate, Father James. If I know, I might have to kick someone out so someone could go in. Subdeacon, you're a trooper. I'm gonna kick you out for a little bit. Is that okay?
No problem.
All right. So let's see. Does this work? No, it don't work. So I kicked him out for no reason. Okay, 1 second. We're gonna see if we get the Anglican legate in. It's just we got closer, I think, to anyone in human history has ever got to getting this many non-ecumenists on board. And I may be having issues with getting Father James on. I can't get this fifth guy here. This is terrible. Let me see. Maybe this will work. No, that didn't help at all. Well, it's Father Jim to keep screwing around here and you be patient. And so we came very, very close. When we get on, maybe he'll get his comments on what we said so far. But the question is, where does the rubber meet the road? So on paper, we're so close. And I would say even logically speaking, I could see a Roman legate allowing that intent thing to go through because it doesn't actually validate the Vatican I.
Perhaps, yeah.
Right? So, I mean, I think that could actually work on paper. And so... I mean, I think we're closer than we've ever been in history due to that. But that being said, we're about to see it go with Chalcedon and Ephesus. So, that's where the rubber meets the road, where we have these situations. And we can't unpack this. It's going to be too many episodes, already more than 2 hours. But so I'm just going to actually, instead of posing to you what you don't like, I'm going to pose to you, to Jonah, and then to Subdeacon. Is there any way, with any sort of clarification, any sort of apology, that you could accept the Council of Ephesus and the Council of Chalcedon, or one and not the other? Jonah, how about you give it your best shot?
In the Church of the East perspective, Ephesus would not be able to be recognized as a true ecumenical council because it spends more to just Christology when it comes to our perspective on Ephesus. And even Metropolitan Hilarion, when he has a book on Isaac the Syrian, the spiritual world of Isaac the Syrian, he even mentions in his book that for the Church of the East, a big issue is the procedures of the council. You guys are well informed of the council being done prior to the arrival of the Antiochians. So that would be one of the issues there. And then we would dive into Christology. So that would be how I see it. I don't think the Church of the East can accept Ephesus, but as for Chalcedon,
well, but could we now, 1600 years later, do any sort of agreement where then you could accept the council? Like what Antioch originally did 2 years after the council. Is there something where your synod can now do a retroactive affirmation of the council?
It's definitely possible, but there would need to be some major clarification, with the 12 chapters and with, the procedures of the council as well. For that to happen, there would have to be, I think the first step would have to be a acknowledgement of the anathemas, which we would consider false. The anathema on Nestorius and those.
He's talking about the 12 anathemas.
Yeah, and so sadly, for the sake of popular consumption, we're not going to be able to. This could be a whole other episode, whether we could play these kind of mind games to try to reconcile these things between the traditions.
Yep.
But how about Chalcedon? Is Chalcedon acceptable?
Chalcedon is already accepted in our perspective. There was a synod in 544. The guy in my profile picture, Marawa I, he's a venerated saint. In his synod in 544, he ratified the ordinances of Chalcedon.
All right. So it seems like we have one and not the other. We need creativity to get the third letter of Cyril to be accepted, certainly speaking. Maybe more creativity than is humanly possible. But all right, Subdeacon, Chalcedon and the subsequent Orthodox councils, is there any way they can make things right that you could accept it?
So there's a few that'd be really complicated. We would, firstly, in the case of anyone who's in the church, including the Church of the East, we need to be sure everyone accepts the 12 anathemas of Cyril. And then we would need to also know everyone condemns the 3 chapters, etc. Chalcedon would, maybe it could be up for discussion to be purely a disciplinary council or with administrative canons, but not theologically, not the theology of Chalcedon.
So there's no way Chalcedon could be framed to say, this is how we understand it. Now, today, we're not looking to redress the past. Will you accept Chalcedon based upon this is how we understand today? Is there any way they could word that so then you could accept it?
Yeah, if they make the definition to say from 2 natures, and that the hypostatic union is a union of hypostases, and that the tome of Leo is regional to the Latins.
Now, could they say from 2 natures means in 2 natures would mean exact same thing? Is that acceptable?
I'd have to think about it.
Okay, so
I want to add a comment real quick, if that's fine.
Sure, go right ahead, John.
As for the history, we have to look at the history and see what happened and examine it, because this, at the end of the day, is also going to go down as history. But that history in Chalcedon and what happened in Ephesus, that needs to be examined and to see who's really right, who's really wrong, what really happened, was it unjust, and then we can move from there, because that's what caused it in the first place. And to fix what's broken, that would have to be examined. So I think Subdeacon Daniel and the rest of you guys would also agree with that. The history is crucial.
And so I already know you, Matt, would agree with me. As long as they accepted conceptually our councils, as long as then they signed on to those councils, then that's what would be relevant to us. I'll pose this to you, Matt. Your communion has subsequently had additional councils that you identify as ecumenical. We have not synodically given consent. Is it possible that if we hammer out this union in Nicea 2025, that any Western councils are treated as local councils? You may consider them yourselves ecumenical, but they are not binding onto us until we consent to it. Is that something that's acceptable?
Yeah. It seems. I think so. Again, if someone can smack me down, if they've got something that they can show me, but on the face of it, that seems fine to me. Because honestly, I understand the point about historically, like if sins were committed, then those sins need to be repented of, regardless of whether, we think of what we think of our, theological positions. But to me, me personally, like the theological, the theology is the most important thing. The procedure is important, but the most important thing is, like, can we hammer out the theology and get that in a way that we can all agree with, rather than saying, oh, this shouldn't have happened this way and it needs to happen that way. And like, okay, yeah, we can handle that, but like resolving the theological differences, or maybe like finding out how much of a difference there is I think what we need to do first.
Now, Father James, I don't know how much of this you caught onto. So I'm gonna first ask you. I'll ask you this: have you heard our reconciliations on purgatory, indulgences, original sin, Immaculate Conception, and as far as we got into papacy? Or how far were you able to get into that?
All I heard was about the infallibility thing, and I want to. As the only other Western Catholic here, I do feel like I have to defend something concerning the challenge of papal infallibility. I detest and reject papal infallibility as a heresy, but I do need to defend against an argument. So when talking about intent, in the Western tradition, what we tend to mean when we're talking about intent, especially on the sacramental or sort of ecclesiological level, is an external intent. So the question, for instance, if I am baptizing something, if I say, I baptize thee in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, if I don't genuinely mean that in sort of my inner intention, that does not matter.
No, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
It does not matter in the least. So likewise, we can have, like, not we, but the papists can have this idea that the Pope can have an external intention, where even though inwardly he doesn't intend to say something infallibly, as long as he's externally done so, then it's okay. That is the furthest I will go with defending the papacy on anything.
Thank you.
Now, Father, would we allow a particular definition of intent? Would you allow that particular definition of intent that I gave forward to apply to infallibility for the sake of rendering it impractical and inapplicable?
I think it would have too much damage to our just sort of general understanding of how the church works when it comes to intent. And I think it would give into a lot of sort of, especially postmodernist sort of mentalities. So I would have a major issue with that, because it might heal in a sort of fake ecumenism in the here and now, but it's going to cause so many other issues down, if not even.
Okay, and so we have, ironically, perhaps the Anglican delegation putting the largest roadblock to
that is what we do best.
Now let's do we anathematize and depose Father James and not recognize him as a legate? Raise your hand. Subdeacon?
Oh, the papists always hate us anyway. We can say the best thing.
Do we depose him? All right. So you don't matter, Father James. You could just observe what's going on here. Let me ask you this: first 6 ecumenical councils you could accept, I presume. The 7th ecumenical council you could accept. We've talked beforehand about the Latria Dulia distinction. Is there any theoretical basis in which you could accept the Latria Dulia distinction?
Oh yeah, I totally can. I think it's the question is not so much the Latria Dulia distinction itself as much as how it tends to work itself out theologically. So within the Anglican tradition, even within the Reformed Anglican tradition, we have those distinctions, although we don't say it exactly that way. So, for instance, a very Reformed element of our liturgical practice is the priest will reverence the altar. He passes by it. That is not worship, obviously, but we just we can recognize that distinction between worship and reverence. So, yeah.
And so, could you accept the reverence and making images of the saints for the sake of making reverence to the man of God?
I'm personally not opposed to it. I mean, I have iconography, and I'm not opposed to reverencing icons. My issue tends to be on the extent of how it's done especially within the East, but even within
Now,
various sections of the Latin.
could we render it as disciplinary and then thereby up for negotiation how someone reverences, but that it be obligatory to reverence the saints and images of God, that you must be able to pay reverence to them and that they're worthy of reverence?
I would actually have to reject that. Sorry.
All right, so then we hit that roadblock there with the Anglican delegation, but they've already been deposed and are not part of this council. Quick one, yes or no? Could everyone just agree to leavened bread and just deal with that so that there's no more arguing over it?
We use
Jonah,
leaven.
Jonah, we have leavened bread and that's it.
All we use is leavened bread. We don't use anything else.
All right, Subdeacon, could the Armenians, just for the sake of peace, put the least bit of yeast in their bread and a drop of wine in their chalice?
We tried telling them. You could try telling them.
All right, and so you'll accept it, and if they just don't go on board, just their synod won't accept this council. All right, Father James, can we make all the bread leavened? Are you okay with that? If that makes everyone else happy.
Well, I would love to also add crackers and grape juice.
We don't want that.
He
doesn't count. All right, Matt,
I agree. Yes, leavened bread.
Matt, could we return to the original Latin practice of having leavened bread? We not pass a comment on the validity of the Eucharist in the past, but now starting 2025. The Latin Rite and all the rites will use leavened bread for the sake of peace in the church.
No.
All right. So,
nope.
Right, we hammer all this theological stuff, but they won't put any yeast in their bread. So there you have it. Now, here's the last one, and then we're going to have audience questions, which is the saints. Is there any possibility that we could accept each other's saint canonizations? Father James, could all of our saints be saints?
Yes, and we have one unique saint as Anglicans that is canonized, and that would be King Charles, Saint Charles the Martyr, Charles I. So I do want to hear everyone's thoughts on that. He was martyred defending the episcopate against the Presbyterians.
Yeah, maybe I'm confusing him with someone else. Wasn't there another King Charles who maybe converted to Roman Catholicism on his deathbed or very close?
That's Charles II,
okay.
Which would be.
So his father then is what you're talking about?
No, Charles. I think it's his grandfather, if I recall correctly. King Charles I is the one who was martyred for defending Anglicanism against Puritan Presbyterian.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's.
Catholic Matt, you accept who's that guy of Narek? You accept that Assyrian guy is a saint. Is it a problem to have all these guys outside of Roman communion to be saints?
I did prepare for this a little bit. So here is my hello, Brother Paul. Here's my thoughts on this matter. I have definitely seen a lot of Eastern Orthodox saints that write vicious polemics against Rome. And obviously on a personal level, I find it revolting. And I also probably know that there's no way Eastern Orthodox are ever going to say, okay, never mind for those people.
But could you say never mind?
No, but here's what I think we could do. We could say, okay, polemics are polemics, sins are sins. We'll have to just leave these folks alone for you to venerate locally. And you can call them canonized, and every other communion is just going to have to tolerate it. Just going to have to live with it. Just going to have to live with the fact that those polemics were said, and somehow God had mercy on them and they got to heaven anyway.
All right. So Matt's going to give a cautious yes. We're going to give you a response in just a second, Father James. Just very quickly, if our Oriental delegation is still here, could you accept anyone else's canonizations? Yes or no?
No.
No. Jonah, could you accept anyone else's canonizations? Yes or no?
No.
I would have to agree with no. How about you, Father James?
I would say that, being an Anglican, being within the Protestant Reformation, the idea that I mean, it's not quite this, but the idea that you have to die perfect, it's just not going to be a thing that's required. So you can die having, been mean to people, and you still die in the faith. So you can be a canonized saint and still sin.
All right, and so I'm going to leave it open to audience questions. Now we have the other Paul here, who is tagged along to the deposed Anglican delegation to this council.
We're slowly taking over.
2025. Let me give you a couple minutes to have comments based on the compromises that we were able to actually accomplish in this pretend council. Is there anything you'd find acceptable? Is there anything that let me just leave it to you. There we go. Mr. James White's friend himself, the other Paul.
Audite. Qui non subordinato esse regi Anglico anathema sit.
Get this guy. He's stuck in the back door. Get lost.
For the normies out there, he who is not in subordination to the King of England, let him be anathema. All right.
So,
sorry, Matt. I couldn't say hi to you. I want to say, but hello. Good to finally catch up with you live.
You as well.
Awesome.
You as well.
Wow, a lot of stuff to summarize. So let's see. So papal supremacy, infallibility, cringe.
And so I'm going to cut you short. So take your 2 minutes. Be concise.
Yeah, sure. So papal infallibility and supremacy, cringe, can't accept that. Iconodulia, more strong than Father James. No, that's cringe, can't accept that. I think, and perhaps he probably does have a different interpretation, but with the Homily 2 of the second book of homilies against the perils of idolatry, I think that is abundantly clear that second council was utter cringe and wrong. What else? Veneration of the saints. Again, another area I'm probably different with Father James. I'm quite strongly against that. As to like the most basic kind of it, where you like ask a saint to pray for you. So none of the super elaborate, oh Mary, I come to thee, I fly under thy protection and that. But like the really kind of basic, hey, Saint so-and-so, please pray for me. Like if it's not elaborate, I'm still kind of against that, but I'm not going to be most fussed
anathema.
If someone does
Anathema.
that.
Anathema.
No, anathema to everything else, but perhaps not to that. Probably just a cautious little.
Throw this heretic out.
Let me add one more thing very quickly. Hey, Paul,
get out.
Paul, may I add something?
Paul.
Security.
Yeah. So I do want to ask if we can stop stealing Anglican saints like the beloved C.S. Lewis. If you ever mention him positively, please give credit where credit is due.
I agree. I think C.S. Lewis belongs to the Anglicans, and we disown him categorically and completely.
Yeah. Well, that's fine. You can disown him too. That's fine too. But don't call on him and say how great he is, and then pretend, oh yeah, he's an Eastern Orthodox, or oh, he's a papist. Yeah.
Also, by the way, I'd like to ask if you guys would also stop claiming the Anglican saints of the 12 apostles. That'd be great.
No, they belong. They belong to us. And so, Matt, you want to have one last thing to say, or we're going to do audience questions?
I think I'm good for audience questions. I say we call security. I don't know how other Paul snuck in here.
Well, I could kick him out. Wait.
Yeah, he's just sneaking the unlocked back.
Decree here, man. I got an imperial decree. You can't stop me.
Craig, I want to say something.
All right, so we got this. If union happened, what would the Eastern churches do with councils that Rome considers ecumenical? And what we hashed out today, they'd be treated as local synods, being that we were able to, over so many doctrines, come up with compromise where the Roman doctrine would be interpreted in a way that we all found acceptable. We could, without accepting the council, say, well, we accept these doctrines as we have hammered it out in Nicea 2025. As for those synods, they would be local. So that's how we could deal with that. So that's for me. We got this for Father Daniel. Are the Oriental Orthodox more prone to geopolitical disputes than liberalism?
Who's Father Daniel?
I guess he means subdeacon. He's just looking at all the doctrine. I'm so used to Father Daniel Zoyev that I
was looking at I didn't see anybody. So I think so. I don't know what geopolitical means, but I think that would be.
Meaning, like, I don't know what Egypt's doing, what the countries, the politics there.
Absolutely. That's a bigger issue for us than liberalism. Absolutely.
Here's a good one, and I'm going to leave it to everyone to answer for themselves. So everyone gets a chance. Which two legates can most easily form a union with the least compromise? I would say it'd be Father James and the other Paul, but them aside because they're deposed. I would say it would actually be.
No, we deposed you guys.
I would say it would actually be myself and Jonah so far.
Yeah, I agree.
Sounds the closest. That would be my saying. All right, let me give it to Matt, and we'll go through the Brady Bunch.
I honestly don't know. It seems that maybe the reason is that I'll admit that I have not studied Oriental Orthodoxy and Assyrian Church of the East. I have not dived too much into them, and so I'm just gonna have to confess ignorance on that. And I've done much more study personally on the discrepancy in the disputes between us and kind of like the Byzantine Eastern Orthodox, rather than Subdeacon Daniel and Jonah's communions. So as far I assumed it was going to be me and Craig, so I guess I'll go with that.
All right, Jonah.
Yeah, I think it would be the Church of the East side and the Eastern Orthodox. I think that would be the smoothest reunification. So I agree with Craig there.
Subdeacon.
I agree. Church of the East and Eastern Orthodoxy, absolutely.
Father James.
My understanding is that at least within Egypt, a lot of the Anglican and Oriental Orthodox relations are very strong. So I'd probably put.
All right, and the other Paul.
I'd agree with Father James there, probably, as little as I know.
Okay, now I'm going to put forward my question as an audience question, which is, could we make this an agreeable Christological definition that Jesus Christ is a singular person with two substances or essences of divine and human essence in the present since the incarnation and into eternity? Is that something you would accept? Matt, I presume yes.
Yeah, that sounds fine to me.
Jonah.
Yep, of course. That would be fine.
Deacon Daniel.
We can say he's a member from two essences.
He's a what?
A member from two essences.
What's that mean? Maybe I don't remember in that way.
He's
a member. Explain that to me.
This is already lost in translation.
He's a member from the humanity. He's one human from all of humanity, and he's divine in that he shares the same essence as his Father. So he's a member from both essences. So
then you wouldn't sign on to the language I just posed, a single person with both a divine and human substance since the incarnation into eternity. Those are the words. Accept them or reject them.
No, I wouldn't accept them.
All right.
I'll counter one, and maybe this is easier. Okay. Jesus is fully God and fully man.
Yeah, we all accept
absolutely.
that, bro.
Yeah, we all.
Yeah, that's a bit.
That, honestly, I wish the church just left it at that. It's so simple.
I think truly would be better.
You got a point.
All right. Well, Father James.
Yes.
All right, and then the other Paul, we're going to put you in agreement. Okay, let's go down. I didn't know a person with both a human and divine essence was something so controversial, but that's why the Oriental Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox are not in communion right now. Let's see. We have no Lutheran delegation. We'll have to. They're not as big in the apologetics world. Everyone defaults to Anglicanism. We need like Wisconsin Synod. No salvation outside of the Wisconsin Synod. To
be fair, that's not their actual position, but okay. Yeah.
All right. So, what role could doctrinal development or koinonia be used to unite folks? I'm going to pose this to Subdeacon. Do you think that we could use the epistemology doctrinal development or the epistemology of discretion to really be a uniting? Were we doing even either of these things in order to do it, or no? Could it work or not?
Like we did today?
Yeah. Like
Yeah, I think so. You were familiar with this, Craig, in the conversations of 532. There was a list of conditions that both of our sides agreed on. It was like 12 points, I think, and it was just the last point we couldn't agree on, and that was the libellus of Hormistus. That was the only thing. Everything else we agreed. So we got to find that list, because who cares about the libellus anymore, right? And then
Matt.
we're good.
All right. I would answer that question by saying economia like could be used. Maybe particularly, I was hearing a lot from Matt, like a lot of discretion with what could be disciplinary, and so that's obviously economia within our context. Doctrinal development also works as well. But I wouldn't accept any compromise on doctrinal development, because essentially you're saying is we just changed our mind over years and we just want to make it epistemology, make it okay to change our mind. And that I don't accept. I'm going to pick two people at random. Jonah and the other Paul, how about your opinions?
Yeah, so how I see it is that there was one deposit of faith, and think of it as like a magnifying glass. As you look over that deposit with a magnifying glass, it expanded, and we understood it more over time. But I don't accept doctrinal development. I don't think there was a solid development. Maybe in terms, but in substance, I don't think there was. I wouldn't be able to. Sorry, I wouldn't be able to compromise.
Other Paul?
Yeah, this is an incredibly finicky one. Not only because there's the doctrinal development thing, but I think an underappreciated dimension of it is the ecclesiological. Like, if we're talking about a kind of a semi-ideal of mine, I guess, of like a sort of Cyprianic ecclesiology of like every bishop, they have the right to determine the official teaching of their own churches. Then, like, because there's no per se central authority that determines the truth infallibly for everybody, then I'd say in a limited extent, yes, we could develop more so in terminology. I agree with Jonah there. In terms of like when new issues and not really issues, because when the march of time passes on, when language develops, when worldview develops in our culture, there is a necessity to
30 more seconds
in the sense of making things clear. But I want to emphatically say that the full divine deposit was given entirely to by Christ to the apostles, and so in the sense of truly developing new beliefs, even minor ones that are nonetheless of the faith, which at one point were not present, no, off the table.
All right. Yes or no? No elaboration. What happens to the anathematized Christians? Can they start their own churches? Yes or no? Matt?
The first, there's two questions. So the first one is a little ambiguous.
Or heaven, hell?
Yes or no?
The answer to the second question is emphatically no.
All right, Jonah.
Absolutely not. They have no authority.
Subdeacon.
No.
Father James.
Way too vague a set of questions. Way too vague.
Yeah, I agree.
Answer is hell no. All right. Could Isaac the Syrian or Isaac of Nineveh be a path of reunion between the Russians and the Assyrians? Just so people are aware, because this is a meme, he was, arguably speaking, historically in communion with both of our churches, because there was a communion between both our churches, I believe, in the year 628 during the reign of the Emperor Heraclius. So I don't know if he'd be a path, but he is an example of a member of both our communions that was within both our communions. So there you go. Jonah, I'll give you opportunity for any comments.
Yeah, as for Saint Isaac of Nineveh, 7th century bishop of Nineveh, I think that he would be a key to reunification and understanding the three chapters, for example, particularly the person of Theodore of Mopsuestia. He says that Theodore of Mopsuestia is accepted like one of the apostles. Anyone who opposes his words is alien to the church. So I think that as an EO, you would look at that and see, what would be the issue there between us regarding Theodore? Would there be an issue? Because we both highly revere Saint Isaac of Nineveh. That's how I would see it. So I think that would be a bridge to unification.
Well, maybe a bridge, at least we could agree with him and not Theodore Mopsuesta, which I'm sure I'm pronouncing wrong. We're going to take 3 more questions for the sake of time, because it's already been a very long show and probably the most ambitious in some sense when it comes to this spread of belief systems. Matthew, could the Roman Church ever consider Vatican I as a local synod? It sounded like in a certain peculiar circumstance you would accept this, is what we said. But how would that work? So how about you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, like it depends, I guess. And I guess one sense, yes, but in order to have union with everyone would still basically have to accept what it said about the Pope and the Papacy, and its and in particular terms of the primacy and what it says about papal infallibility. I mean, like if everyone wants to assent to those and say, like what I said earlier, that they could agree with that, and then they say, okay, but Vatican I is still a local council, I guess, sure, that wouldn't bother me.
All right. We have Subdeacon. If Christ has one nature, is that nature divine or human? That's the question posed to you.
It's his both.
The composite nature?
Yeah, it's a one composite nature from both natures.
And so is composite nature just synonymous with composite hypostasis? Do you have that terminology? Okay. So there's our answer there. I'm going to want to give both, perhaps. If Father James, you could pass it to the other Paul, if you want to, but otherwise, being that you are clergy, what is the Anglican view of the filioque, essence, energies, and theosis? So as quick as you can, because that's a lot of. Do you accept the filioque, yes or no?
I am accepting of it, but I'm also actually prefer it not being in there. And our prayer book is actually working towards essentially getting rid of it eventually.
And so then your interpretation of filioque would be according to, let's say, Saint Maximus in the Letter of Marinus. Yeah, my opposition to the filioque is only in how it was inserted, not necessarily the theology, actually. Okay. Essence energy distinction, cool or no?
Basic, yes. I think it depends on what's meant by that, and I'm not a Palamist. I'm not a Palamist expert, so I'd have to look more into it.
All right.
And theosis, yes. Yep.
And theosis, yes or no?
Yes.
Other Paul, I'm just going to give you filioque. Any comments?
I kind of passively deny it. I frankly don't care about that issue a whole lot. Like, I think it's just a tragedy that's enough to split churches. But otherwise, I'm kind of just casually like, nah, I don't really affirm it. At least with the respect to the double procession, the kind of from the Father through the Son, I'm cool with.
I'll break my rule. Said 3 questions, but Jonah, we don't always have you here. Are Assyrians willing to accept Cyrillian Christology? Is there any sort of terminological jumping clarifications they can make where you could accept it?
Cyril himself, no. But, the lens in which Chalcedon interprets him, which that would be questionable, then I would say, yeah, because we accept the tome, which you would say is Cyrillian. In that case, yeah, but Cyril himself and the stuff he says, no, we wouldn't be able to.
Neb asks, and I'll answer shotgun way, how do you think the Church of the East should be received back into Eastern Orthodox baptism, chrismation, confession, all 3? I think our conditions would be identical to theirs, which would be they'd have to disown their saints and accept all of ours, they'd accept all our councils, and we wouldn't accept any of their local councils that we just never recognized. And we would have to know the form of their baptism. I'm going to guess that you guys still do exorcisms of the waters, that you still do triple immersions.
Yeah, triple immersion, name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, everything.
And so baptism would probably be via chrismation, just considering their form is probably identical. Chrismation would still occur. They wouldn't be vested, though. Arguably speaking, they could be. Like, if we want to be really liberal, we could treat them like novations. It's in the canons, and they could just be accepted via confession. So it's possible. The main thing is what they're confessing. So I think we'd probably be identical with that. Unless, Jonah, would Eastern Orthodox have to, do you guys follow the canons like the novations? Is it even possible that we would just be vested in?
Yeah, you guys would be received by a confession of faith. There would not be a rechristmation or a rebaptism.
What about with
Interesting.
Rome? With the Roman
Same,
Catholic?
same with Roman Catholics. It would be by confession. We don't re-chrismate. We don't rebaptize. We don't do that.
Same with us.
All right. And so we're going to give everyone the opportunity for plugs. And so I'm going to start backwards. Other Paul plugs.
All right, plugs. You can find my channel, The Other Paul, on YouTube. I've got various other areas. I just got accepted to a new, pretty exclusive streaming service, which won't like censor you for naughty opinions like YouTube. I'll be having a launch stream there soon. I've got my website, theotherpaul64.com. Got every now and then post blogs, and I'm aiming for one major essay every month. So that's pretty cool. I'm fundraising for a Greece and Turkey trip next September, which is going to be excellent both as a personal spiritual thing and for content. And also, I am building the next doco for Craig, The Errors of the Catholics. So get hyped for that. That is going to be very fun. And if anyone wants to hire my video production services, including Romanists against the Orthodox, hire me. I'm your man. I'm a mercenary. I can play both sides. Matt, if you want to pay to make something, I'm your guy. As long as it's not against my beliefs, I'm cool.
now, Father James, plugs.
Well, I run Barely Protestant, a YouTube channel. I'm also a rector, a priest in charge of a parish. So keep me in prayer. It's my first time being the rector of a parish, and it's been just wonderful. I've been loving it so far. I'll be performing my first baptism on an infant this Sunday, so I'm very excited.
Do your baptisms, do you still have exorcisms for the water? Does that exist?
We have exorcisms where they have chrism, all that.
And do
3 times.
is it pouring? You don't do full immersion. How wet did they get?
So the standard is pouring. I do plan on eventually going into actual full immersion.
And so this could be a water ride for this little tyke.
I'm sorry?
It's going to be a water ride for this. Like they're going to get wet.
A little. Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm going to make sure that the baby's going to get wet. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Subdeacon, plugs.
Thanks, Craig. So I have my channel. I have a few videos on there only, less than a handful, but it's a baby. It's coming up. Look out for more coming soon. I think we're going to do one soon on the supposed so-called Apollinarian forgeries on
that I'll be really interested in all honesty, because I've not seen a lot of critiques from the other side. Just kind of just people just, they're forgeries. I guess they probably are. What do I know? But I'd be interested in you getting into that, particularly because they're quoted in the Council of Ephesus.
Yeah.
So if they're really forgeries, you at the very minimal have to say, well, God filtered through to one, superintended the spirit that worked through the council to accept what was good in them from these writings of a heretic.
Exactly.
So it'd be so much better if they weren't forgeries.
Totally. Yeah. And anyway, look out for some cool episodes coming up.
So that sounds good. Jonah.
First, I want to say thank you for having me on. I appreciate that. So I am going to start up a blog and a YouTube channel soon, and the YouTube will just be under this name, The Assyrian Biblicist, and then I'll be starting up a blog just to shed some light on the Assyrian Church of the East traditions, just stuff like that. So that'll be coming soon.
That is, keep us updated, and your contributions are very much appreciated. It's made, and I see at 2025 a bigger success than would otherwise be, and that is appreciated.
Thank you.
So, Matt, plugs.
Well, first, thank you so much, Craig, for having me on. And I got to say, when we first texting earlier today, I thought it was just going to be you and me, and I get to meet another nice 4 Chads on here. So it was very nice to meet you all. And especially you, the Paul. I know we've crossed swords a bunch, and it's nice to finally, get some personal interaction. As far as my own personal plugs, I've been kicking around the idea of starting a YouTube channel for the last, 7 years, and it hasn't happened yet, but it's gonna. And in the meantime, follow me on Twitter, Matthew Pao, at Matthew Pao, at MatthewPao, and watch the fun.
He pretty much hates on everyone that's lame on Twitter. That if you follow Matthew Pao on Twitter, I'm one of his followers, and I don't really use Twitter that much, but I appreciate following his Twitter. So definitely do that. And yeah, this whole idea was cooked up this afternoon. This was This was not a very carefully thought out plan, and it's turned out real well.
Yeah.
My plugs are orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate for those who want to bless the churches in Cambodia. I'm very, very, very grateful for the several non-anonymous and anonymous donors that help support the making of the documentary. It's fully funded. That is being done at the other Paul, Eris the Catholics. So look forward to that. But also those who have continued donating and above and beyond for the support that the parishes in Cambodia. A lot of exciting things will be happening there soon. We may be getting one of our, maybe, God willing, one of our first missionaries on top of the priest there that will be starting there. And a lot and for him to stay, it's going to continue support if he decides he's going to make a vocation out of this. So pray for him. I won't give any names because none of that's official yet. But pray that God will raise up people to evangelize in Cambodia, that the priests there will successfully make converts and help the people that are there that are part of the parishes. Of course, pray for me. And I ask especially right now for prayers for a family, my sister-in-law, Chanti, who's getting surgery right now in Thailand because there's no good doctors in Cambodia. You get surgery done, you always go to Thailand. So please pray for her because it's actually life and death. So pray for the surgery to be successful and then have healing. I am confident the prayers of so many people watching this have tremendous power. So please pray for Chanti. That'd be very much appreciated. So even if it's just that prayer or you financially support $1, $5, $50, whatever, 100, one guy, tens of thousands of dollars, actually. Support the churches in Cambodia, orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. It's making a difference. I also want to plug Sunday night is going to show in honor of the actual death of new martyr Daniel Syzoyev. We'll be talking about his evangelism tips so that way you could do street evangelism and we could motivate people to become missionaries and do the work that's needed to convert souls to Christ, to the Orthodox Christian faith. And so also tune in Sunday. There'll be special guest Timothy Honeycutt of the Orthodox Wisdom Channel. So that will be definitely a blast. And a special guest who I will not reveal who it is, but there will be a special guest also that Sunday night. You will not want to miss it at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So guys, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real blessing to me. This has been just a phenomenal episode. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Craig.
Now, guys, could we all do the Brady Bunch? Ready? The Brady Bunch. The Brady Bunch. No. There, the other Paul's getting to.
Marsha.
So I'll end the show as I end all of them by quoting Jesus Rock. Fight to death for the truth, and the Lord God will fight for you. God bless you all. Have a great day.
Amen.